We good? Good evening. Today is Wednesday, January 25th, 2023 at 7 p.m. We are in the Brecksville Broadview Heights Education Center, 6638 Mill Road, Brecksville. This is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is time for public participation during the meeting as an indicated agenda item. This meeting will be live streamed via YouTube and will also be recorded for later viewing. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel where all recordings are posted. Item 1B, Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 1C, roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman?
Yes.
Mr. Dosen?
Yes. Item 2, President's Announcements. Don't have much. Happy New Year. Hope you enjoyed your snow day today. We'll move on. Item 3, Board Appointments. Item 3A, Board Appointed Reports. Cuyahoga Valley Career Center, Mr. Gilbride is not here yet. He said he was going to be coming. If you could scroll up a bit, I'll give his update. I'm sorry, scroll down a bit. I posted his feedback to me. He said he would be here, so he might be getting caught in all the traffic that's out there. So you can see his updates there. He was basically going to share with us the new board members that are on their board for 2023. I'm not going to read through all of those. Let's see. Gary is board president. Ashley is vice president. We'll circle back to Mr. Gilbride if he shows. If not, there's not much other than all is good. And then we do have OSBA legislative liaison, well, which is Ellen. We just threw that in there. I know they just sent out an email, but you don't have anything to share on that front, right?
I don't.
Okay, no worries. We're going to move on then to item 4, Superintendent Committee Reports. Financial Liaison Audit Committee is Mark and Kathleen, myself. We have no update on that front. The next item is Permanent Improvement Committee, Ellen and myself. Do you have any comments?
I don't.
Okay, yeah, there were no updates for this month. Board Policy Committee, Kathleen and Tish.
No updates other than we have a final read tonight, so we will be doing that and voting.
Okay.
In policies.
Yeah, so we do have a number of policy adjustments that we will be doing the final read and approval on this evening. Are we at Transportation Appeals Committee? Myself, there were none. Safety and Security Meeting Report, Brittany and Tish.
Nothing at this time.
Okay, Schools Foundation Report.
Yes. Schools Foundation, as I mentioned last month, is holding their annual fundraiser on February 16th. That's a Thursday at 750 Mill. Tickets and auction items can be found at bbhsf.org. Street signs are back for those that are interested. I know that was a hot item last year, and then new this year, some of the items are golfing with the mayor, and there's a new dinner package in the mix. So you can find out all of that information on their website.
Very good. PSO report, Ella.
There was not a PSO meeting or PSO council meeting in January. The next meeting is Thursday, February 2nd in this room at 9:30. And there is a big fundraiser for the PSO next Saturday, February 4th. It's at the middle school. It's the magician, Rick Smith. He's been here a couple of times recently. He's very entertaining. They are asking they still need some volunteers to help with the event. So if anybody's able to help, there is a sign up Genius link on our board agenda. And that's it for today.
All right, we're going to move on to item 5, Superintendent's Announcements. I'll turn it over to Joelle.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to introduce three very special guests. They are going to talk to you about their LLS campaign. If you are not aware, our high school takes it upon themselves by having a team of kids get together and do some fundraiser for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Team Arrow. We have Megan Macy, Sydney Macy, and Nicolina Rasick. If you want to come up to the podium and make sure on the microphone, you push the button so the green light is on, girls.
Good evening. I want to say first off, thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight and speak with you. We're so excited to share about our campaign and tell you guys all about it and what we plan to do for the district. So before we begin, we kind of want to introduce ourselves a little bit, to put a name to a face. I'm Nicolina. I'm very involved with the high school. I'm a member of the tennis team. I'm a part of a few clubs such as Bio Club, Key Club. We all recently just got inducted into NHS, and we're always volunteering for Key Club and stuff.
I'm Sydney. I'm involved in Key Club, SAD Club, Student Council, NHS, and I also run on the cross country team and the track team.
My name is Megan. I'm involved in Key Club, SAD Club, NHS, Student Council, and I also run track and cross country for the school. So a little bit about leukemia and lymphoma. 80% of childhood cancer survivors develop a chronic health condition from their treatment. Every 3 minutes, someone's diagnosed with blood cancer, and leukemia is the #1 most diagnosed form of childhood cancer. LLS has contributed towards many different things, such as increasing survival rates, helped advance treatment for various different types of cancers, helped advance 85% of FDA-approved blood cancer treatments, and LLS is investing in breakthrough scientific research in 11 countries around the globe.
So we are competing in Student Visionaries of the Year. So Student Visionaries of the Year is a 7-week student-led campaign where teams across Northeast Ohio compete to raise as much money as they can for kids with blood cancer. And then at the end of the 7 weeks, whatever team raises the most amount of money is awarded the title of Student Visionaries of the Year.
So this year we've chosen the name Team Arrow, and last year's name was a little hard to top, Team Telescope, which was led by Bridget Butler, Kate Butler, and Ella DeTrent, who did a phenomenal job. They were able to raise $61,000, and all 3 of us had the privilege of being on that team and contributing towards that. So thankfully, we were also given the privilege of being now the Student Visionaries of the Year candidates. And Kate and Bridget are also now our mentors for the team. So we've chosen the name Team Arrow. When experiencing tragedy or something really sad, it's really hard to maintain optimism and stay hopeful. However, we want to target leukemia and lymphoma and bring optimism and joy to all families and children that are experiencing this pain. We firmly believe that all children deserve to lead happy and healthy lives. So we, Team Arrow, are aiming for a cure to shoot down cancer through research. Oh, sorry. This year, we decided our team goal is to raise $40,000, and we are hoping to achieve this through sponsorships, our fundraisers, and donations.
So our campaign dates, the campaign actually starts this Friday, January 27th, and runs all the way until March 18th. We have a few potential fundraisers that we are hoping to put on. The first one that we are doing is this Tuesday, January 31st, at the boys varsity basketball game. It will be a red out. At the basketball game, Nicolina, Megan, and I will be running a table where people can donate. They can purchase 50/50 raffle tickets. And at the end of the game, we will be doing a Light the Night little mini ceremony where we can honor those who've been affected by blood cancer. On February 10th, we are hoping to do a Valentine's Day middle school dance. On February 14th, we will be doing an elementary school bingo night. On March 1st, we will be doing a spelling bee for 4th and 5th grade students. And then on March 11th, we are hoping to do a middle school and elementary school talent show.
So our team has a few social media platforms such as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can find us at LLS Team Arrow on all of those, and you can stay updated and connected with our team. Once again, we're so excited for the campaign to kick off this Friday, and we want to thank you all for letting us be here tonight. We're so excited to see how much you raised. We hope to almost double our amount, if not triple. We're so excited once again. So thank you all for tonight.
Thank you, ladies. And don't feel like you have to stay. You're more than welcome to stay. But I know with the snow day today, you probably don't have much homework, but you can go if you want to go. All right, thank you. And I'd also like to recognize our school board. It is School Board Recognition Month, and I'd like to thank all of you for your service and for your dedication to our kids. And I have a small certificate to say thank you.
Thank you. Does that mean you're going to be kind to us during hearing of the public?
Thanks, Joelle.
All right, is that it? All right, thanks. Moving on, item 6, treasurer's announcements.
Just two quick things. We've been really progressing along with the middle school auditorium renovation project. So we're getting a timeline together. We've had a huge donation recently from a local company. So we'll rebuild more of those details later, but they're going to project manage that whole thing for us. We have a purchase order in place to get the seats ordered for the middle school auditorium, and it's progressing nicely. The other thing is, per the conversation we had last month, just to kind of update people on where we are in getting pricing, at least, and the total, the cost and timeline for potential demolition for Hilton. TDA is currently working on that. It's about 4 to 6 weeks out. They have to do asbestos, site survey, and also geotechnical first. So it's going to be several weeks until we have a more definitive update in terms of at least how long it would take if the board would decide to do that, and how much it would cost. So we'll have that information. Hopefully, I would say probably at the March meeting would be ideal. And that's it.
Okay, great. Item 7 is hearing of the public. Let me read through this. Hearing of the public. Persons wishing to address the Board of Education may do so at this point. No formal action will be taken on subjects that are not included on this agenda until the board has had an opportunity to study them. Comments regarding personnel must be submitted in writing through the Office of the Superintendent in order for the board to complete the planned agenda in an effective and efficient manner, and to provide sufficient opportunities for members of the public to be heard. Hearing of the public shall be limited to a maximum of 60 minutes, during which each speaker shall be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. So we do have a lot of people in the room. I have a feeling I know what most of you are going to comment about. So again, what this little narrative means is that hearing of the public is just your opportunity to make comments and for us to be heard. It's not a question and answer. It's not a dialogue between the public and the board. You just get to say what you want to say. Now, I will tell you that following this agenda item, we have our next agenda item is an elementary school discussion. So it is our plan to have a very thorough, open, transparent, and comprehensive discussion about probably everything that you've been bringing up and probably will say this evening. So we will discuss it, but that discussion will just be between the board and Joel and Craig. So just so you all know. And the 3 minutes, I'm going to put a timer on my phone. And so we just ask that you kind of, try to abide by the 3 minutes. If you go over, you're going to hear my alarm go off. And if you would just please try to wrap up. And hopefully we don't need 60 minutes, but if we get to 60 minutes, we're going to have to cut it off at 60 minutes. Okay, sound fair? All right, so when you get called up, you'll just come up to the microphone and you have name and address, and then you can go into your comments.
First up is Raylan Irwin.
Hi. So I'm a numbers person, so I'm going to spend most of my time here talking about some of the numbers that I've read. Every grade level class that's currently enrolled in the elementary school has increased in size since it began in kindergarten. The 5th grade class, which is currently 255 students, started kindergarten with 218. That's an increase of 37. The 4th grade class is currently 264. It started with 221, an increase of 43. The 3rd grade class has increased by 26 students. The 2nd grade class has increased by 33. And the 1st grade class has increased by 27 since just last year. That's an average increase of over 33 students. All of these numbers come straight from the enrollment study that somehow concludes that enrollment is going to decrease when all the numbers seem to point towards it increasing. The study claims that COVID is partially to blame for the 2022 kindergarten enrollment increase, stating that 62 students could have enrolled in 2021, but parents chose to withhold those students an extra year due to the pandemic. That argument only makes sense to me if the 2021 kindergarten class was smaller than average, which it wasn't. It had 249 students. Had those held back students been enrolled last year, the kindergarten class last year would have been larger than this year's, and the problem would exist in the first grade instead of the kindergarten currently. The study also points to an increase in live births in 2017 as part of the reason for the increased 2022 enrollment. That same chart, however, shows that the estimated live births in 2020 through 2027 are all going to be higher than they were in 2017, yet somehow still concludes that enrollment is going to decrease. Not to mention the fact that BBH is still a growing community. We still have new developments that are being built, including Valor Acres, which I think plans to have over 200 residential units, townhouses, and apartments in it. So in my opinion, this problem isn't going away. This isn't a one-time spike in kindergarten enrollment. The problem is that we built a school that's too small to accommodate the community that it's supposed to serve. Nobody wants to own up to that mistake in order to find a viable solution, is what it appears to be. Instead, we're hiding behind an enrollment study whose conclusion seems to be contradicted by its own numbers. Even more concerning than the overflowing classrooms is the fact that we've doubled down and simultaneously decreased supportive services such as speech and reading intervention. Logic would assume that as number of children in the classes increases, so would the amount of time each specialist has to spend with that classroom, but that isn't the case. For example, based on what I've heard, last year's kindergarten classes each received 30 minutes of time for reading intervention a day. This year, that's been cut to 15. That's 15 minutes for 26 children. This is a complete disservice to these children, especially those who may need additional help in order to not fall further behind. Research supports that early intervention is key in minimizing or even eliminating the need for intervention in upper grades, and yet we're still cutting that time. And there's no doubt in my mind that these decisions are going to have a negative impact on quality of education, on student success, on school ratings, on test scores, and on teacher retention. So in my opinion, a plan needs to be made immediately to fix these problems that have been created by the new elementary school. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Kelly, and I won't try to mispronounce your last name. Thank you.
I'm Kelly Swaglak, 8666 CMQ Drive, Broadview Heights. I have twins in the kindergarten class that was moved on Monday into the collaborative space in the elementary school. Although a parent meeting was held and some accommodations were promised for the space, I'm not satisfied with the resolution, lack of timeline, nor how the situation was handled and especially communicated to parents. In my opinion, allowing the preschool to take space from the K-5 part of the building never should have been a consideration. Furthermore, the staunch resistance to retrofitting this space into a full classroom, as it has been promoted on many occasions, it was absolutely infuriating. However, this experience has exposed a much greater problem in the elementary school. There is no proactive plan in place to manage current enrollment space in the building. Currently, there are 291 enrolled kindergartners spread over 11 classrooms in 12 sections. In 5 short months, they'll be moving up to the first grade and maybe very well be over 300 strong by August with only 11 sections. In 2nd through 5th grades, there's currently only 10 sections, which will amount to 30+ kids per class. This isn't a 5-year problem, this is a right now problem. In the recently updated enrollment analysis, it states 62 kids were eligible to start kindergarten last school year and may have been delayed due to COVID. While families choose to delay start their kindergartners for many reasons every school year, if even half of those 62 kids identified had started kindergarten in the 21-22 school year, there would be 307 first graders today, which is even larger than the current kindergarten class. I understand growing pains of a new building, but it's time to stop putting out fires and simply reacting to situations. It's time to stop trying to justify the studies that have been done and manipulating the data to fit the current situation. It's time to put together a proactive plan immediately to manage current enrollment and space in the elementary building, because right now there is none. Per the April 17th, 2019 special board meeting, district target classroom ratios are 20-1 for kindergarten, 23-1 for grades 1 through 3, and 25-1 for grades 4 and 5. Are there enough classrooms to accommodate our district targeted class ratios? What spaces can be retrofitted to add additional classrooms? Are there enough lockers, cubbies, tables, desks, and chairs at every grade level to accommodate a class of 300+ kids? Because they're coming. I'm alumnus from this district, and in addition to my twins in kindergarten, I also have a 7th grader. I moved back to the area after living out of state for 8 years so my daughter could start kindergarten in the district. After registering her for kindergarten in the late summer of 2015, I received a phone call days later stating that kindergarten was full at Hilton and they were going to send her to Chippewa. After hearing my unacceptable response to this revelation, I then received another call a few days after that, stating they'd found the absolute last open spot in kindergarten at Hilton. There were only 19 kids in her class that year. Now, 8 years later, my twins have the same phenomenal kindergarten teacher in a brand new state-of-the-art elementary school with 25 kids in their class, and they were just moved into the hallway. Over the last 8 school years, I've spent hundreds of hours of my personal time volunteering for this school district. As a parent, a taxpayer, and a registered voter, I become more and more frustrated with this district with every passing day. Without a proactive plan, you're
20
not only failing
seconds.
our teachers, staff, and administrators, you're failing our parents and taxpayers, and worst of all, you're failing our kids.
Thank you for your comments.
Vanessa Kaslow.
My name is Vanessa Kaslow. I live at 147 Jamestown Drive, North Railton. I am here to request a formal plan be created, communicated, and implemented by the start of the 2023-2024 school year to address the needs of students and to accommodate the high enrollment at the elementary school. On January 13th, we learned our kindergartner, her classmates, and her teacher would be relocated to the open collaborative space in the kindergarten pod in order to accommodate an additional preschool classroom. As parents, we have several concerns with our child losing her classroom and how this will affect her receiving an equitable education as well as afforded the same safety and security as her peers. We understand that our teacher, Mrs. Travers, volunteered to take on this adventure, as she called it, because she's an amazing educator and an amazing role model to her fellow educators. She saw a need and stepped up, but this responsibility should have never been on her shoulders. I have since seen the space and understand this is being treated as a short-term solution, and I understand the situation only impacts a small percentage of students at the current time. However, it's highlighted a much larger challenge we'll be facing in the next year and years to come as this group of children progresses through school. There are currently 291 children in kindergarten. If the class size increases by the typical average, there will be at least 300 children in the first grade next year with only 11 classrooms. Looking even further, second grade only has 10 classrooms, making the average student to teacher ratio easy math. Even for my current second grader, who has 27 kids in his classroom with 2 special needs that require aids, so his room is packed, I can't imagine them squeezing another 3 to 4 children in an already cramped space. A recent study presented at a board meeting pointed to 62 children that could have entered kindergarten last year, but didn't because of COVID. I think this isn't unfair to make this assumption without providing year-over-year statistics on children who delay kindergarten. Parents make these choices based on their individual children's needs. Alternatively, if just half of those children had started last year, the current first grade would be well over 300. We can continue to analyze the why, but at this point, it doesn't matter. We have a student population that is what it is. I have awesomely average kids. They're quiet, they don't need a lot, they love school, they're happy to be here. But I worry that these large class sizes, that they'll be lost, forgotten, and not challenged. They're entitled to a public education that is fair and equitable, just like their peers. I know even you, our administrators, don't want small class sizes for these students. Our plan cannot be to wait 5 years and see. A plan needs to be created for these kids for the 2023-24 year. Whether it's relocating the preschool, the 5th grade, or retrofitting collaborative spaces to create
20
classrooms,
seconds.
we need to see action. I respectfully request that you present us with a plan on how to utilize the existing space for these kids.
Thank you.
Tracy Gibb.
My name is Tracy Gibb. I live at 4360 Ryland Drive and have a second grader at BBH Elementary. I thank you for adding the elementary school discussion to the agenda tonight. I'm not here to argue the studies that went into the new building design, nor argue the newest study on enrollment figure projections. I fully understand that these sources are telling you that all will level out in 5 years. I'm here to ask what the plan is to address the problem right in front of us today. The overpopulation at the elementary school today, a problem that is not going away this year, next year, or the year after. We are busy telling parents all will be fine in a few years when we all see that it is not fine today. Every classroom in that building is packed. There is no room for supplies or students or teachers to move around. Teaching assistants are being moved around often to address additional classroom needs. There is no place for kids to move indoors when they cannot have recess outside. Are you aware of the support groups that our caring guidance counselors have established for overwhelmed students? Multiple support groups because the need is so great. Not kids with sensory issues or special needs, I can only imagine how they must feel. These are just kids who used to love school, who now dread aspects of it because everything is bursting at the seams. Support groups for elementary school kids in a top district in the state. We have asked for superhero efforts from the staff at this school to band-aid solutions because strategic solutions are absent. They are working overtime to make this work. They need your help in bigger decisions to serve these kids. We are failing these kids and our staff today, not 5 years in the future, now, academically and emotionally. We need bigger thinking and a 1 to 4 year plan for how we will address the problem in front of us. Parents are here to help and be a part of the solution. We can't wait 5 years. Develop a plan to address the problem we have now. Thank you very much for addressing it.
Thank you for your comments.
Mina Gartman.
Hi, my name is Mina Gartman and my address is 6521 Crabtree Lane. My son is one of the kindergartners being displaced mid-year from their traditional classroom into the open collaborative space to accommodate a preschool classroom. Like many of the other parents, I'm dissatisfied with the solution and disappointed in the way this change was communicated and executed. It's illogical to let preschool take a classroom from the K-5 part of the building. However, the bigger issue that it's uncovered is that the elementary school has a classroom crowding and space capacity issue. This will only continue as this large kindergarten class moves into first grade and beyond. I have 2 children who attended South Suburban Montessori in Brecksville, and I know firsthand that there's a large number of students who complete kindergarten there as a part of their 3-year Children's House program, and then opt to move to public school for first grade. South Suburban likely has the same problem with a larger than expected kindergarten class, and those students will add to the first grade enrollment numbers this fall at a larger rate compared to historical data. Even an incremental increase is going to challenge the school's capacity. I also live in a large neighborhood that continues to turn over and new homeowners have young families. Houses that go up for sale do not stay on the market long, and it's really a testament to the school's reputation that parents want their kids at this school. The problem is going to get harder and not easier. If there's not a strategy to account for this, we will continue to experience the space and crowding issue year over year. I urge the board to recognize that this is an issue and take action. A one-time inequitable learning environment for these 25 children is a problem, but acknowledging that this situation will continue to be an issue and creating a proactive plan to address it going forward would be an extremely positive outcome. I understand that this is a new school with unanticipated problems, but we should learn and not repeat the mistake. If this displacement is temporary while we figure out a longer-term solution, our children are resilient and I know that they're overall safe. I'm not pleased, but I think all of us understand. My biggest concern is that this will be dismissed as a one-time problem, which would be a huge error. The number of classroom spaces and teachers need to be appropriate for the number of children that are enrolled, and we cannot let the classrooms increase to 28 to 30 children in one space with one teacher. The space available in the school needs to be configured to protect against that, and all K-5 grades should remain intact at the elementary school. Without a plan to mitigate, this could happen to my child again, giving him 2 years of an inequitable classroom experience, which would be unacceptable. But having other children and families experience this next year with this much forewarning would be extremely unacceptable. Please fix this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Natalie Longa.
My name is Natalie Longa and my address is 5910 Fawn Lane, Brecksville. I am here to request a plan be created by the board to address the current enrollment and related number of classrooms. The parents and interested parties should have this plan communicated to them in a timely manner, and it should be implemented in the BBHCSD to accommodate all students enrolled. I request that this plan also be communicated publicly at the March Board of Education meeting on March 22nd, 2023. My concern stems from the current enrollment in the kindergarten class at the elementary school. My child's current student to teacher ratio is 25:1. This is a far cry from the previously promised small class sizes and target ratio of 20:1 for this age group. Actually, none of the grade levels K-5 meet the target student to teacher ratios that were identified by the board at the April 17th, 2019 special meeting. There are currently 291 students enrolled in the kindergarten class, and when assuming a traditional 3 to 4% enrollment growth rate, the class will easily have at least 300 students entering the first grade in the fall. The problem of a high student to teacher ratio and lack of number of classroom only compounds when this class enters second grade. One can assume there will be far more than 300 students at that point, and the number of classrooms drops from 11 available to only 10. This is a problem that must be addressed now, as these numbers are not based on anticipated enrollment or prior enrollment studies, but actual number of children in the school right now. I look forward to the solution the board will create to address this problem and reach the target student to teacher ratio for all elementary grade levels. I know the board cares about both the students and the teachers and will create a plan to address the growing problem. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Morgan Makovjak.
Hello, board member Mac, board member Kwiatkowski, my name's hard too, board president Dawson, board member Kramer, board member Wigman, treasurer Yinglos, and superintendent Magyar. Thank you for letting me speak today. I'm a mom of 3 children who live in the district, 2 of whom are kindergartners that are affected by the move to the collaborative space. I am here to discuss a serious issue at this elementary school, and I hope we as a community can address this immediately. As other parents have mentioned, this classroom is going into a collaborative space, and I hear and acknowledge all of their concerns, but I have a different concern. My concern is that this space, while visual appealing, has a serious flaw in that there's not a 4th wall, and that is a safety issue. There needs to be empathy in this space, which I did not see a lot of at the meeting prior. There needs to be acknowledgement that being the first kindergarten class after the tragedy in Texas in the spring may make us kindergarten parents a little bit more worried. There needs to be understanding that this is not an ideal situation, and there needs to be acknowledgement that there was a mistake, and there needs to be an acknowledgement that something needs to happen. My concern is actually quite simple. Without a wall and a door, my daughters do not have the ability to lock down in the same manner as the rest of the school. A layer of protection that was afforded to every other student in the school, my kids no longer have. And this is not only denied to my daughters, but also to their classmates and their teacher. I know that the school is the state of the art. I've seen it. And I know that there are multiple security mechanisms to including a locked front door and locked pods. I acknowledge that. I thank you for that. However, contrary to what members of the administration have said, a wall would make a difference in an active shooting situation. In fact, the final report of the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission lists equipping classrooms with locked doors as their first recommendation, stating, and I will emphasize, there has never been an event in which an active shooter breached a locked classroom door. In fact, in August of 2020, this administration said to the media, in addition to being thoughtful about the entry vestibule, all of the classrooms are also locked down with magnetic doors. So if there's an intruder in the building, there are 4 sets of doors prior to them getting through a classroom door that they would have to get through to gain access for the kids. It was clearly believed
20 seconds.
that it was important. Then it is still important now. Leaders of a school in Ohio are required by law to help maintain and improve a health, safety environment conducive to student learning. What is happening in the kindergarten class does not do that. I will end with a quote, which is that each student's safety and well-being is of utmost concern to the Brecksville Broadview Heights School District. That's on the website. Let's please practice what we preach.
Thank you for your comments.
There are no other public participation comments. That was the last one.
Okay. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Item 8A, other board business, elementary school discussion. So as promised, the board has created this agenda item. There were many issues that were brought up with our elementary school, both this evening and via email. So we asked Joelle if we could have a conversation about this, because I know she and Colleen Toth and maybe others, our SRO officer, had addressed some of the concerns to various groups. We thought it would be a good idea to bring this in front of the board and let the board have a conversation, hear the same things that were shared with many of you already, and so that we could then have an opportunity to ask questions and have a dialogue about it. And again, this is not public participation. This is just between the board and our administration.
So I know you had listed a couple topics, and we took a lot from your feedback and your emails too, so that we could have the conversation here with board members. And I do want to thank Mr. Dosen and Ms. Kwiatkowski, who did come on Tuesday to visit the elementary school to see the classroom space and to see actually the kids in action while they were there with Mrs. Trevors in the kindergarten space. So thank you for coming and seeing that as well. So the first thing on the list was to talk a little bit about our growth of the preschool. We are not an anomaly, meaning that everybody's preschool is growing. When we designed this building, and this building was designed back in 2018 and 2019, the kids who are turning 3, we are required by law, by the state of Ohio, to start servicing kids at the age of 3. Some of those kids come to us already with a diagnosis from the doctor. Some come to us at 3, and a parent might simply say to us, I think there might be something wrong with my child, and we're required by law to evaluate those children. And so when we were designing this space, and we were designing this building back in 2019, many of these 3-year-olds that we are in the process of identifying or observing right now weren't even born yet. So we have right now a need to increase our preschool, because many of the kids that we are seeing, which again, we're required by law to serve, are coming in with some profound needs. We're seeing a lot more autism than we've ever seen before. And these are not kids that are coming to us that are being diagnosed with disabilities that we can serve itinerantly. And what that means is if that kids have a disability that may not require school-based services, in some cases, depending on their disability, we can serve them in another location. So if they're going to daycare somewhere else, or if they're going to preschool somewhere else, we can send one of our teachers to them to serve. And we do that in many cases with kids who may have a speech-only disability. We can send a person to the school. The kids who have behavior needs, or kids that have autism or require some additional support from another staff member, like an educational or special educational assistant, we're required to bring them into some school-based type of service based on their needs. And so here we are. And because kids turn 3 at multiple times during the year, these evaluations that we are required to do are ongoing throughout the year. So it's not all in September. Now we can get an idea, especially if kids have had a previous diagnosis from a doctor, to say, okay, in February, when this child turns 3, because we're required to provide services when they turn 3, it could be in the middle of the year. So hence we're dealing with right now kind of a bubble of kids that have come before us that are turning 3 between the time of February and the end of the school year, that what we're evaluating them for looks to be as if they're probably going to end up needing school-based services, which is why we needed to increase our preschool. We do look at other locations. If we are out of space at our own preschool, we can call North Royalton, or we can call Independence and ask if they have any seats available in their preschool, and then we can service those kids in that school-based service if they have space. The problem is that there's no space. This is the issue that we're having with growth in our preschool is also being experienced in our neighborhood school districts as well. So we needed to create another space for the kids in our current school due to this requirement. That preschool class will open up at the beginning of February. It will have, it's a morning and afternoon class, and it will be completely full probably by the end of our school year in June, based on when birthdays are and the number of kids we have in evaluation. So the growth of
and Joelle, I'm sorry. So just a quick question, just to clarify then with preschool. So we have a legal obligation to provide services to preschool students, but it's preschool students that have potential disability or learning issue. Is that correct? So it's not everybody who wants to send their kid to preschool can come up and say, you gotta take my kid. These are just students that have special needs.
Correct. And then based on, we have different models of preschool where we're also required, if you are running a special ed preschool, to provide typical peers. So peer models for the kids as well. So those have to be factored in when we add new kids that have disabilities. We also have to think about, the peer models. Currently in our preschool and some of the things that we're looking to change moving forward, because we recognize that, we can't be taking space out of the school to accommodate classroom needs. So what are some things that we're looking at for preschool next year to kind of see if we can simultaneously control how we serve kids? So one thing we're looking at is the number of kids that we have in our current preschool that are speech only, because that was something that we've done in the past where we have brought kids in that are speech only students, and looking at, is there a way that we can still meet the needs of those children, but service them itinerantly? The other thing we're looking at is we currently run a full day program for our kids that have the most profound disabilities in our preschool. It's an all day program. We have always done that in Drexel Broadview Heights, but it is not required by law. It's required by law that we provide a half day program. And since many of those kids will be transitioning to kindergarten next year, we are looking to change that program into a half day program, which allows then the afternoon to have spaces for additional students. So moving forward, this class that we're creating here in February will not be needed by making some of those changes so that we free up more space in our current preschool program.
And for preschool then, and this spike in enrollment of parents coming to us with preschool students that have special needs that we're required to service, was there any way to predict what was coming our way? I mean, is there, do we have any way to kind of gauge and say what's coming? Or because, there's some things in our control and there's some things not in our control. And some of what we're dealing with, not just the preschool, but across everywhere, is being a victim of our own success. We're talking about a school district that has performed very well, that has a very good reputation, and then we built a state-of-the-art school. So, and we anticipated some bump when we opened that new school, but we're seeing more than just some bump. But again, back to the preschool question, because that was the genesis of what started the kindergarten class to have to be moved. Was there any way for us to see this coming, to kind of plan for it, or is it just something that the numbers just started rolling in?
So twofold. A lot of our preschool kids are siblings of other kids in the school. And if we know the families and we know about them, yes, we can anticipate. There are some organizations that will let us know numbers, but we do, just as everyone has said, we had a lot of Ukrainian refugees move into our district, many of which did not speak English, which is not a special ed issue, but needed special services that we weren't expecting. But there were some students that came in with some special needs too that we did not anticipate. We do have people that move here from out of state, and we have a lot of kids who have moved here from out of state this year, and they come with an IEP, or if they're kids that were in another district and they come. So some you can anticipate based on organizations and based on, families that we know about, but the move-ins is really where we saw our most growth in preschool this year. And you don't know they're necessarily coming, especially if they're out of state and they're not tracked through the Ohio student identification system.
Yeah.
So my question is, you had come back to talking about the difference in how we're going to serve students next year. Does that mean, I just want clarification then, that kindergarten classroom that has been moved is going to return as a kindergarten classroom? Because I just want to make that sure we are not going to maintain that as a preschool. That classroom will open back up as a kindergarten class.
That is correct. That is our plan right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, my screen is so small, I can't see. Okay, so the next thing we were going to talk about is moving Mrs. Trevors' class. As it was indicated in many of the comments, Mrs. Trevors volunteered to do this. We did not ask her to do this. We never approached her at all. She actually came up to Mrs. Toth and said, I'd like to do this. She did do that. I own and acknowledge, and have already had a conversation with Mrs. Toth about how this was communicated. We did know before the holidays that we were going to do that, that Mrs. Travers wanted to move into that space. Mrs. Travers had asked us at the time not to communicate it right away because she was going to be out for a week right after break and was concerned that if parents had a lot of questions, she wouldn't be there to answer those questions. So she worked with Mrs. Toth and they developed a timeline as to when they wanted to communicate that they were going to be moving. I know that there are some safety concerns and I'm going to invite our SRO officer to kind of come in and talk about that space, some of the safety things. Come on in. Some of the safety things that are with that room. I know there is a belief that there is not a safety plan for that space. The reality is there is a safety plan that is required by our law enforcement in all of the spaces, because at any given time, kids are in any space in that building. So we have kids working in all the collaborative spaces in first grade, in second grade, third, fourth, and fifth. There are kids in the collaborative space all the time. We also have kids in the media center. We also have kids in the makerspace room. We have kids in the cafeteria. We have kids in the field house. And so there are safety plans and procedures for all of those spaces because they're all spaces that kids would be at any given point during the day. And, you know, if we had a lockdown and there are kids in the media center, there's a plan for that. And that plan is not going to look like if they're in the classroom. We have a plan for the makerspace, and that plan is not going to look like if they were in the classroom. There's a plan for the cafeteria, and that plan doesn't look like if they're in the classroom. So all these different spaces all have safety plans, and they all look different. So I don't know, Officer Mark, if you want to talk about your experience, you're in that building most every day doing walkthroughs and all the pods, and kind of talk about what you see.
I'm in that building full time. I walk through the building usually a minimum 4 times a day. I walk through all the pods. I walk through all the collaborative spaces. I poke my head in the classrooms. I wave to the kids. And I mean, it's just something that I do all day long. Moving them into the collaborative space, I understand there is no wall and there's no specific door there. But there is like so much around that. And there's so many layers of protection and security prior to getting to that point. We're talking at least 6 layers or 6 levels of doors to get to that point. Okay. If there was something that were to take place, they're not going to remain in that area. It's not like they're going to sit there and wait. Okay. It would be just like as if the 5th grade has a collaborative space, 4th grade, every other grade does too. And at any given time, there could be 10 to 15 students out there that are working on something. They're working with a special project. Sometimes kids get special details that they work on and they'll be out. They had a science project in the 3rd grade all last week. Every time I walked through there, they were working on erosion projects. So there were 20 to 25 kids in each side of the collaborative space working on erosion projects. The cafeteria has kids in it for a minimum of 3 hours of every day. That's a lot of kids going in and out of there. Not to mention they're walking into the field house. The field house is a completely separate entity. We have to have plans in place if anything were to happen where these kids can go. So it's not like they're going to be left in a collaborative space.
Questions? Yeah, are you asking a question, Ellen?
I was just wondering if you could be specific about what the plan is.
That was going to be my question about the safety.
I know for sure that there was a bathroom there, and I know Ms. Travers said that we can shuttle kids in there. There are also rooms directly across from that, which would be where the kids would go if they were outside of the doorways or outside of the rooms working on projects. It's not like the alarm goes off and everything's slammed shut in the classrooms. Those are the outer doors that do that. The teachers are going to pull the kids in and they're going to lock the door. And that would happen with any of the collaborative spaces because it's throughout the whole building. They're like giant pods where the kids actually work on things.
Okay, so then my question is, all right, there's a safety plan. We move the students to the collaborative space. They are, and there's a safety plan for that. And I hear what you are communicating. So what room are those kids going in if there was to be an emergency? And, you know, has the staff been trained, they're aware. Are we going to do a safety drill for those students?
We
Okay.
haven't done one yet. It just happened. We just moved them. But we are going to work on a lockdown and they would go directly across the hallway.
And then how is this going to formally be communicated if this is the safety plan to the families? I mean, I hear that we're talking about it in public. I understand that everybody
I
can
don't handle that part.
listen. So how are they going to know
Yeah,
step by step?
Mrs. Toth is out
They
of,
need to be communicated.
yeah, Mrs. Toth is out of the building right now. I know her and Officer Mark have planned to do a safety drill, just like when we come into the start of school, we do within the first week of school, we do a fire drill. We have to do 2 within the first 10 days of school. And we do safety drills all the time in the buildings. She plans to have, because it is new and we're talking about 5 and 6-year-olds that
Yeah.
need to know exactly where they need to go. And so when that drill is going to happen, we will let parents know that drill is going to happen. We will communicate after we do. Now, when we do lockdown drills, we send an email right out to parents and say, we just conducted a lockdown drill, and give, a little bit of details. We don't give a lot of details because many of our safety plans are not public records. So it's not like something we're going to send out a map and say, here's where this child's going to go, here's where that child's going to go. But it is that we do conduct a drill that the kids will know and have a working knowledge of where they are supposed to go. And we will practice that drill again. And if kids don't do it the first time, it will get practiced again until it is of the teacher's satisfaction that the kids have a great understanding of where they're supposed to go should there be a lockdown drill.
So I know back when we were going through the design of the building, there was a lot of emphasis on creating collaborative space to try to be moved towards newer ways of education, not the old model where the students are in one classroom for the majority of the day, with a door, that you wanted to have a lot of collaborative space. And even beyond that, one of the things, and if you were to go back and watch old board meetings where we had these conversations with the architect, I know I raised a number of times, well, what happens if we have a spike in enrollment? What happens if our enrollment grows? And one of the themes that was repeated is that the collaborative space, that as your staff learns to use it and evolve their approach to education, students will use the collaborative space more. So more and more students won't be spending so much time just in their classroom. They'll be coming out into the collaborative space, and they'll be rotating around in the collaborative space. And so my sense was, from a security standpoint, that's hard to lock down a collaborative space, that the design was put onto the locking down, getting into the building and getting into the pods. And so, officer, is that your experience, that that's kind of where a lot of the hardened security is?
Yeah, because those doors are all triggered. I don't want to get into specifics on the security behind everything, but those doors are triggered. They close. They're locked immediately. Okay, and that's even if you get in beyond the 3 vestibule doors and then get past me and then get into the building, because then you have layers of doors to get into hallways and then to get even into the pods.
Right. Right. So some of the security focus, because the building was designed to not have students in their classrooms all day long, to be out and about, to be in the media center, to be in the cafeteria, to be in the collaborative spaces. The whole idea was to have the hardened security on the shell, so that once you're inside, you had more ability to move around without fear of a tragic situation unfolding.
Any other questions for Officer Mark?
Not for Officer Mark.
Okay, I'll keep going. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So converting the open space into classrooms by constructing walls. Yes, absolutely. On every tour we said that this collaborative space in the kindergarten area and in the first grade, if needed, could be converted into a classroom. It was one of the reasons we put a bathroom in that space, that if we had to do that, it was already equipped that looked just like the other classrooms if we wanted to do that. But as you stated, Mr. Johnson, in the early designs of our building, I will say even in the original designs of the building, there were no walls. Those pods were just open areas, and there may have been a lab designed in one corner, and they may have been a reading nook designed in another corner, but the rooms, there were no real classrooms. They were sectioned off spaces. So the idea is that we would have all the second graders learning together in a learning community. Socially, this is the greatest social experiment, and we're very excited to see how it works. And what I mean by that is that for the first time, we have kids, because of the way we designed the building, we have all of our kindergartners going to class and having that collaborative space, and all of our first grade and second grade having this collaborative space to be social and to get to know each other, and then go to middle school together. What happens when kids go into middle school? They're nervous. It's a little socially awkward because they're meeting kids from, before they were meeting kids from 3 or 4 different schools coming in at once. And that 6th grade time was that kind of awkward period of like, ooh, who are all these new kids? Now we have the ability for all of the kindergartners to get to know each other, all the first graders, and then they move together. It's kind of like the model, if you look at a Catholic school model per se, they have kids that they stay in the same classes from K to 8. And by the time they're in 8th grade, these kids are all family. They all know each other. They know everything about each other. That's what we're doing, but in a public school setting. That is why when we designed the building, we kept all the kids together so that they had that growth and got to know each other. And we designed these spaces so that the kids would come out in the collaborative spaces and be social. Do we need to do a better job of utilizing the collaborative spaces that we have? Absolutely. Absolutely. The reason one of the parents asked at the meeting, if that was the original design of the building, why did you put up any walls? And that's a great question. And what we did, just as we listened to many parents through that design of the building, we also listened to our teachers in that building. And our teachers only know what they know. They do great work, but they've only taught in a traditional classroom. That's all they know how to do. And so the design of the building, because it's going to outlive all of us in this room, nobody's in here, the school is still going to be standing and all of us are going to be gone. The idea is when you design a building, you have to design a building that outlives you. So what is education going to look like 50 years from now? We don't know, but our best guess based on trends and what education should look like is in the design of that building. And what that means is those collaborative spaces are designed where all the teaching does not take place in the classrooms per se. We put classrooms in there so that teachers felt comfortable in the space. But that wasn't the idea that all 27 kids in a class had to stay in that classroom all the time. The idea is that we put 10 teachers together or 11 teachers together, and those teachers all have common planning time. The idea is that they took that common planning time and they would sit down and they would plan out, okay, how are we going to teach reading to all 290 of these kids? We do a diagnostic. We have these kids that are at this level. These kids are at this level. Okay. Mrs. Trevors, you take these kids. Mrs. So-and-so, you take these kids. And we group the kids and be able to do that and use the collaborative space as one of those other groups. Somebody mentioned here about interventions. Where are those interventions going to take place? All in different rooms. So the vision was never that teachers were going to keep the same 27 kids in their room at all time and teach just those kids. The idea was to look at educating these kids as a grade level and using the collaborative space where kids can come out and work independently. If you think about a well-designed lesson, you do about 10 minutes of direct instruction, you model, you let the kids do some practice, and then you work collaboratively in groups. That's what we want our teachers to do with our kids. And the collaborative spaces are exactly why they were designed to do. So kids can go work on their own. We've got to build our kids into individual thinkers and workers. And that is why we designed the building the way we did, to promote, to give the teachers the environment to teach in a different way. And so when we do.
Hold on 1 second. I've talked to a lot of people. I haven't really, and I might have missed it, but I haven't heard an overabundance of people saying they don't like the collaborative space. I think what I hear is the expectation was that they had their children in a classroom, and I've not heard too much about anybody anti-communal, like using these collaborative spaces, but I have heard that, there's an equity situation. They don't feel like their children are getting the equal opportunities that the other kindergartners are getting. So I just want to make sure we stay focused on what the topics are at hand and get me if I'm wrong, because I teach during the day, but I couldn't go look at Mrs. Trevors' classroom. And so was that a big issue, that people have issues with the collaborative space? Is that something that has come up continually? Because I heard people have issues with the child not being in a classroom. I haven't heard that they've had issues with how we're using collaborative spaces or the concept of collaborative spaces.
Well, I didn't hear specific about collaborative spaces, but I mean, I did speak with Joelle and ask her about how do the parents in general feel about their teacher? And it sounded universal that everyone was really pleased with their teacher. So you've got a teacher who's still delivering the same educational materials, a teacher who came to us and said, I want that space. I think this will be beneficial. So, you know, there's concerns that have been brought up about the security, equitable.
I get that.
You know,
But we
it's
weren't
the same.
talking about that. We were talking
Okay.
about these collaborative spaces and this idea. So I just want to make sure we're sticking to what the concerns are. So I didn't
Well,
hear that.
yes, but the collaborative spaces tie into security.
I
Okay,
understand
so
to that.
we're, but that we are, this is
a classroom. This is not kids moving in and out or me taking 10 kids. This is a full classroom is what I heard the issue was. So the issue isn't that they're anti-collaborative space. The issue is that they expected a classroom and they saw collaborative spaces, but now their classroom is now a collaborative space, which wasn't what was communicated. That's what I understood when I talked to parents. That's their issue.
well, just to set the guardrails, this conversation has no border saying, we're going to talk about this, we're not going to talk about this. We're talking about all things elementary school.
I got
So
that. It's just
Mrs.
kind
Travers'
of-
class is one element that was raised. Overcrowding, enrollment study, class sizes, all of these things. So this conversation will go wherever it needs to go to cover everything that we want to
So
cover.
let's stay targeted, and stay with those ideas rather than talking about the educational purposes of collaborative space. Let's talk about, you know, how we're utilizing what we have today, right now. That's what I want to talk about. And that's what I think people are here to hear is like, what are we doing with, you know, how we're going to be equitable for their children and how, you know, we're going to plan for the future for that equitability. That's what I'm hopeful that we get to.
Well, and again, so this is an open, organic conversation with Joelle. We gave some bullet points to say, let's touch on these topics and we'll take the conversation wherever the board wishes it to go. So at any point, if you want to jump in and, you know,
Sure.
and drive deeper down on one particular topic, but everything we've talked about right now, I think is beneficial.
I get it. So allow me, Board Member Dozen, to say that what I would like to hear is like for this kindergarten class, these people in this room, like how are we creating an equitable solution? And with the way I'm understanding them is they don't feel like they're getting equity. They don't have a door or a wall, and they don't feel like their children are getting equitability in this collaborative space. That's what I was understanding the issue was.
Equitable meaning it has to have a wall and a door.
No, it's fair. They have the same opportunities as the other children in the kindergarten. As far as safety, if that's what we're focusing on. I'm not sure that some of these parents feel that their children have the same opportunities as the other children in the kindergarten for safety. So we've talked to the SRO, we've heard that, but it's still, they don't have a door. You know, they don't have a wall. They don't have a layer that the other children have. So what
Right.
are we going to do? Like, are we just going to exist how this is? Are we going to just use the collaborative space?
Well,
Or are we going to give them equitable, you know, something equitable?
Well, you're equating a door and a wall as being equitable, and you're locking that in, saying anything other than a door and a wall is not equitable. And so this is a conversation, but the primary concern, it sounded like, was security. So the whole idea, a door and a wall is not going to improve education. It's about security. Was what I was getting out of it. So what we were talking about with security is how secure is the space and how do we deliver security? And oh, by the way, most of the students throughout the day aren't stuck in their classroom all day long with a wall and a door. They're out and about in the collaborative spaces, and there are security plans for all of the collaborative spaces. So, you know, if security is the number one thing on our list, and we want every layer in place, we should keep all of our students in their classrooms all day long and not use the collaborative spaces, correct?
No.
Well, we have collaborative
No,
space.
when you use collaborative space, I mean, this is what I do. We don't take the full classroom in the collaborative space. There's a small amount of children in the collaborative space. It's not my whole classroom.
I understand.
Unless I'm going to the maker space. So this, now we've taken a collaborative space and taken a whole class and put them in there. So, and they're in there the whole day. Okay, unless they go to another collaborative space. So I'm just asking you, you know, like I'm feeling like, first of all, this wasn't communicated well to our parents. I think I can understand why they are upset. This is our first experience with our district. Second of all, like now they're finding out that their child's classroom is now a collaborative space. It's not a classroom. And they thought that they were, you know, had the state-of-the-art building that their children were coming to. So they must be, you know, confused as to why they don't have a classroom. And so now I'm just asking, how are we going to create that security or that expectation? How are we going to fulfill that expectation? And you're telling me that we're fulfilling it just because the SRO says that, you know, it's safe. That's fulfilling that security for them.
Well, I'm not saying that that's the only, that it's just because the SRO officer says. I mean, this has been a collaborative effort with our administration and with police and security to determine whether or not this space is secure or not. And it's not an open, when we talk about collaborative space, some people may think a big open area where they're all just sitting in an open area. I mean, if you went and saw this place, I mean, there are 3 walls. I mean, it's 3/4 of a classroom. It just has one open area, and that open area has a divider in it now. Now, I know a divider is not a secure wall, but I understand that. But the idea with part of this conversation is, and what we focused on, the new way to deliver education is to be utilizing these collaborative spaces, which means from a security standpoint, many of our students are in these spaces throughout the day. They're not in behind 4 walls and a locked door.
They don't even have that opportunity in this class. That's the point. Like, I get that.
Okay.
Okay. I feel like we could do better.
So
Okay,
you're,
I guess I
so
don't
what
wanna do that.
what are you
I don't
suggesting?
have a suggestion. I'm not the administrator here. Okay, I may have
Okay.
handled things differently, but that's not my role. My role is to voice what I hear the public say. And I hear the public say that, you know, they feel like they expected one thing and they're not getting it. That's what I'm hearing. I've not heard that they didn't have an issue with the collaborative space. I'm sure they think it's amazing, but I'm sure they didn't expect their child to be in there, okay, as a classroom. Okay, so.
Well, but as a board
we have to
member,
recognize that. And so as a board member, it's not my job to come up with the solution of what we're going to do, as much as to relay, this wasn't the expectation, at least as a board member that I had, that would be happening.
I understand.
And I think the public, some of the public would agree with that.
So just to be clear, though, this conversation, we're touching on many issues that our families have raised, and we're talking through them. Joelle is giving the administrative perspective on how we got to where we are, what we're doing, what our plan is, what our path forward is, and we as a board have an opportunity to listen, to ask questions, and if we want to, give direction. So when you say, well, it's not your role to create a solution, well, okay, so what are we going to do at the end of this? At the end of this, we are either going to, as a board, feel comfortable that where we're at now is a place that we're comfortable with, or we're going to say, no, we're not comfortable with it. And if we're not comfortable with it, we can't just say we're uncomfortable. We have to give direction.
Okay, so
Other-
I think we were on class size. We're gonna talk about class size.
Well,
or-
if I can actually circle back, I have a question about the collaborative space, but not from a security perspective. My question relates to the professional development that's been provided to our educators. If we have developed the state-of-the-art facility and they're supposed to be using the space, why aren't they using it? Why aren't they using it? Let's just start there.
Yeah, and so I'll say what I said before. I think our teachers they know what they know. Many of our veteran teachers, and they're great teachers. And they've never had the environment or the school to be able to try some of these new things and thinking about how they instruct differently. They just haven't had the space. If you think about our old buildings, they weren't conducive to think about instruction differently because you just had a classroom. So we are working with our teachers. I know Dave and our instructional coaches, our Kathy Schwinn is always in that building, working with our teachers. How do we deliver literacy instruction differently? How do we utilize the space? There's also a sense, and I was in the classroom, and I know Kathleen was in the classroom, at least for me, like you feel like you're in charge and you're responsible and everything needs to be teacher directive to maintain control. And the reality is the less control the teachers have and the more student voice have and the more choices they have over their education, the more engaged they are in their learning. And that's what we want. And it is our job to make sure that our teachers understand that and have the tools and the capacity to do that. And that is what we are working on right now with our teachers with professional learning is how do we get them to think differently about this educational process and their instructional practices in their own classrooms when they've never had this opportunity before. Now we have the space to do it. Now we start with that professional learning on how to do it appropriately.
Which I can definitely appreciate having a new space to explore and really exercise this new way of teaching. But we've known about the design of the building for several years. And my understanding is we've provided professional development along the way up until the school has opened. And now here we are halfway through the school year, and I'm still hearing that we're not using the space as it was intended. So what's our plan to get our kids into the space? Because we're halfway through the first school year, and my understanding is that it's really not being utilized.
And not going to disagree with you. It's not being utilized to the extent that which we had envisioned it being used. And even so, just to further that point, we recognized that class sizes were getting a little high. We hired 3 additional teachers, and the whole idea of hiring those 3 additional teachers was that they would meet with kids from all the different classes to reduce the size in each of the other classes, and they would be the teacher of record. They are certified teachers, trained teachers that work out in the collaborative space. So every day for 90 minutes, they'd have these, 25 kids for reading instruction, and then those kids would go back in their classroom, and then the teacher would pull another 25 for math instruction and then go back. Because class size becomes an issue when you're teaching math and you're teaching early literacy skills. It's not so much that there are 27 kids working on an independent project that are sitting in a room or working in a group. It comes down to that instruction. So we hired teachers to be able to do that. And what we're finding is that, again, our teachers are giving these teachers that we hired maybe only 2 kids instead of what our expectation is. So we have to go back and, again, work with our teachers to say, look, we gave you supports. We have supports. We have certified teachers who can take these kids off of your books and be the teacher of record, and they can teach these kids in reading and in math. And that is not getting done with fidelity the way that we had hoped. And that's our administration, and we're working with them to address that and work with the teachers to help. And sometimes we have to step in and help them figure that out for them. And that's what we're in the process of doing through our instructional coaches, through our director of teaching, learning, and collaboration. It's all a learning curve, right? Kids learn at different rates, so do adults. And so when we look at this building right now, I think I said to you, Mr. Joseph, the other day, it's a new building. Kelly Iza, one of our principals at the high school, lived through this in Strongsville. She opened up a new building, and she had a great analogy. And she said, we came all together. It's the first time we're doing this. And she goes, we stormed. She goes, we were storming. We were figuring things out. We were trying to, first time all these people have been together in the same building. And then the next year we started norming, and then we started performing. And she said, right now, this building is still storming. They're still trying to figure out this processes. And oh my gosh, we have this collaborative space. How do we use that? And the kids are still being educated. We still are getting results from our kids. So it's not like they're storming and it's negatively affecting our kids. We do have support groups at the elementary school, but we've always had support groups at our elementary school. And as those needs change, we've had support groups at the middle school. And yes, we have them at the elementary school too. We always have. So we're not providing any different services that we weren't providing before. Our teachers aren't using any different curriculum that they weren't using before we moved into this building. So we're using the same processes. It's just on a larger scale because we're all together right now.
I think it's really difficult in doing this all day. Those collaborative spaces are ridiculously loud. So like they're good for pullouts, but I can tell you, like, I want a door. I want walls, like my kids won't pay attention. And I teach the high ability kids, so they are the most apt to pay attention. And so they're nice for pullout, but to the defense of my colleagues, like I can tell you, like it's OST time, and it's always OST time. And so that's great that I'm doing projects and stuff, but I very rarely, we have to stay targeted from October to March. So the fact that somebody doesn't have the same quiet room, like it's so nice to shut your door and be heard and let them and discuss. So I get it, but it's also like the expectations, especially in this, district that's so high performing, those spaces are difficult to utilize. And I can imagine they'd be difficult for a full classroom being in them.
So just, I did go, just to add to that, I totally hear what you're saying, but just to let the public know, it was only one data point, right? I went yesterday and got to walk, I especially walked the second grade pod and went into kindergarten, into preschool, and really kind of looked at, hey, what does, this afternoon look like in the elementary school? And the collaborative spaces are being used for small group. They're not maybe to the extent that we want them to be yet as a district, but they are being utilized. And it was quiet. I mean, this is just one time, but it's a testament to our kids, to our parents. You raise good kids. I mean, they're there to learn, they're happy, they're smiling, they're excited. I mean, that doesn't take away any of the concerns here, but I will say that they're in their small groups. I'm walking around, they don't know me. I mean, and they look up, go right back to work. Not going to be every kid, but I'm going to tell you in general, we walked all over and they're engaged learners, which is fantastic. And most of, I didn't count, and I kind of thought I needed to after I left, but there was probably equal amounts open door classrooms to closed door. Because I can't weigh that out. I didn't count, but I'm going to tell you that a lot of classrooms, the teachers have their doors open. And it wasn't loud. So I think that, just to your point, that I didn't see that in our elementary, right, which is a good thing.
I use it for small. I don't use it for my full.
They were small group. It wasn't, it was not like an entire classroom. But even so in the pod, there was a small group here in a hallway, there was a small group around the corner. So there were kids within the spaces near each other, and there was still instruction going on the entire time. So I just wanted to add that, because I think that there's what I've heard in all the concerns that everybody was talking, so I have been listening, is that the concerns I heard were varied. I talked to a lot of people, I got a lot of emails, and I have to tell you that the concerns, I'm not trying to minimize any of them, but what comes to the forefront from me and hearing from our constituents was class size and what is a plan? What are we gonna do? I have significant concerns about that. So that's what I heard more than anything. I heard, I fielded a lot of different things. Concerns about distraction with the classroom moving to the collaborative space. I also fielded concerns about Coco, the dog, and the use of the slide. So I don't think that's relevant to maybe the conversation right now, but we're talking about the elementary school. So there were a lot of things, but the number one thing that kept coming back was class size, concerns for that, and what is going to be our plan if we're going to be busting at the seams.
And I'm going to throw a couple other comments in, because we're kind of all over the place, which is all good. As long as we cover all areas and kind of talk through it, I think it's a healthy conversation. So there were comments earlier made saying, we made a mistake, the building's too small, just admit it, own it, and figure out what to do. So I would just say the building is not too small, because what we did as a district was we tried to right size not pre-K through fifth grade building. We tried to right size classroom space in the entire district. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, listen, Central School used to be the high school, then it was a junior high, then it was for fourth and fifth, right? I went to the high school, which is now the middle school. Okay, so buildings change. So what's important from a district standpoint to right size your district is not that you have the perfect building for pre-K to fifth grade for 50 years, because you don't know what's coming with the ebb and flow of enrollment and children and all that. What's more important is that you have the right building capacity for your district. And so when we talked about the building and we sized the building, we had to pick a number of classrooms. We built collaborative spaces into the design. And the question that I alluded to it earlier was, that was brought up to the architect, what happens if we have enrollment spikes? Okay, if you wanted to keep, if you needed more space, you could convert some collaborative spaces into classrooms. That's one option. The other option is if you have capacity, you could move classes around. You could move fifth grade, up to the middle school. You could move eighth grade from the middle school up to the high school. You can move classes around so that you're not out of space. If you want to know what out of space looks like, about 20 years ago, my son was in fourth grade, which at the time, fourth and fifth grade was in Central. And that was a very significant situation of high enrollment. There was not enough room in the building. So my son spent an entire year in the basement of the Methodist church next door. Was that ideal? No, it was not ideal. It was less than ideal, but we understood and we dealt with it. If you were around during the Great Recession, right after the Great Recession, this district had 3 operating levies that failed. We went to 100% pay to participate, and we went with no high school busing. Was that ideal? It was not ideal. If you were around 5 years ago, 6 years, 5 years ago, when we closed Central early and we moved fifth grade up and fourth grade down, there was a very crowded buildings. Was that ideal? It was not ideal. I would suggest to you that if you have students that will be in this district for their entire careers, you will probably encounter some situation along the way that is not ideal. Is it still fair? Is it still educationally beneficial? I hope so, but the idea that it's going to be perfect from pre-K or kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and you're never going to hit a bump in the road, that's hard to say, because recent history is usually you run into challenges as a district. There are some things you can plan for, some things you can't. Some things you can control and some things you can't. So, as we're having this conversation, there have been many parents that have gone poor that have had to deal with situations that weren't necessarily ideal, but because of circumstances, you're faced with challenges and you have to problem solve. So.
And Mrs. Magyar, were you done with your presentation?
Let me see.
I think we had a few more.
This is a
topics.
discussion, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think we've covered the other things, but I mean, I can go into depth with anything more that you'd like to get some more information about.
Okay, well, I think the other common theme that I've heard from people today, emails that I've received, other people that I've spoken with, is concerns about improving the student-teacher ratio for next year. And is there a plan to address that? And please feel free to reference the 3 float. What are you calling the 3 teachers that were hired after the start of the school year?
They're certified teachers that we've assigned to grade levels that had some higher enrollment in them, so that we could make the instructional size of all of the classes smaller, which was our goal. So if we hired these 3 teachers to teach reading and math, and they were, we had 2 assigned to second grade, or I may have it backwards, please don't quote me, either 2 assigned to second grade and 1 to third, or 1 to second and 2 to third. I don't remember exactly. But we hired those teachers to be full-time teachers to make those instructional sizes in those classes smaller. So if we have 27 or 28 kids sitting in 3rd grade, the idea is that teacher would become teacher of record and grab 25 kids that would come out of all of those classes to then make those classrooms a smaller number for instructional size. And let's not forget, in our third and fourth and fifth grade, those kids are even pulled even more during that reading instruction or math because of gifted identification. So if they're gifted and then we have these additional staff, those reading groups at those higher grade levels were even being reduced smaller. Those teachers would be that permanent teacher for that instruction. So they would be the teacher of record, issue the grades, they would do all their assessments through there. And the reality is that is not happening. Those teachers are working with maybe only 8 kids or 10 kids, as opposed to having their own full class of kids. And that's where, when you ask the question, that we need to do a better job making sure that these staff members that we've hired, certified teachers to provide this instruction, that's exactly what they're doing for the number of kids that we intended them to have, to make those instructional classes smaller.
Okay, although they're not being used for kindergarten or first grade. So is there you just said they were being used for second and third. So is there a plan with respect to improving the student teacher ratio for the current group that's in kindergarten and the current groups that's in first grade?
We have instructional assistants out there in kindergarten and first grade that are assigned to the grade levels to also provide instruction. When you look at the state average, and I know the board set target rates a few years back of trying to target to get there, and I'm gonna have Craig maybe talk a little bit about the impact of, if the target was 22 and the class goes to 24, and the first thought would be to hire a teacher. What does that financial impact look like? You don't do that. So sometimes you have to look at those targets as, this is your target. It doesn't mean that we're not going to go over that target, but to hire a staff member when you go maybe 2 or 3 kids over a target number isn't maybe the most financially responsible thing to do, because why? Mr. Treasurer?
No, I mean, it's one of the things that, like with second and third grade, we have an extra teacher in kindergarten and first, which is why those numbers, they're still high, but they're not as high as what we were facing in second and third grade. So when we started to get in second and third grade to 27 or 28, you have to come across where, like, finances matter, but at the same time, you're starting to get towards an upper limit of an elementary school. And so there was no pushback, like from me in the meetings, in terms of like, yes, that's obviously more money for us, but understanding education, working in education for a very long time, you realize that you've got to do what you have to do. And that's why we made the decision to hire some of those extra teachers. We've hired another special ed teacher. We've hired 3 preschool teachers. So we've been on the hiring spree at the elementary school for sure. And so there is that cost benefit analysis, though, that 22 to 24, does that really warrant a new teacher? Not necessarily. But when you start getting up to those upper levels, you've got to make a decision, and it can't always be about finances at that point.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with that. But what is there, even assuming that you were to hire a new teacher at this point to make for example, the current third grade level, make the class sizes smaller, is there even room to add another classroom of third graders?
Well, again, it's a conversation about how would we use that collaborative space that we have. And if the board decided they wanted to turn those collaborative spaces into classroom space, that absolutely could be the case. But we also know that our third grade class is the highest enrolled that we have right now. And sometimes we can recycle those teachers. So let's say, I'm not going to talk about the enrollment study, but let's say the projections of enrollment are what we think they're going to be this year. And there's, we enroll 250, and maybe we only need 10 sections of kindergarten. Our teachers are certified K-5, so we can recycle those teachers and they can go teach a different grade if need be. So it's always constantly looking at numbers to determine what your staffing is going to be.
Just while you touched on the enrollment, the enrollment study, some people are skeptical of it. It's fine. The enrollment study is a little bit like a weather forecast sometimes too. The farther out you try to project, the less accurate it's going to be. But we use the enrollment study as a data point to help inform decision making. The most important decision that we leveraged an enrollment study for was sizing our new elementary building. Once that sizing was done, the design was done, these enrollment studies are giving us a glimpse of what we think's coming, but that is not the only data point that we leverage to plan what are we doing next. So some of you may be of the belief we're going to have 300 kindergartens rolling through the door for the next 5 years. Maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't. But what we look at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is preschool registration, kindergarten registration, the real numbers that start flowing in. And Joel, I had asked you, what if the enrollment study had said next year we're expecting 300 kindergarten students? What would we have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to some of the conversation points here, like, why don't you move this person? Why don't you, or move this grade level, or why don't you move that? And those are definitely contingency plans. Those have always been on our radar of things that we could do. Moving the preschool out of the building isn't really going to help us because those preschool rooms are a very specific size. They can only house 16 kids. And so I know some people question, like, what's the plan in 2 years? Those preschool rooms are not going to help us in 2 years. They might alleviate right now some kindergarten concerns, but in 2 years, it's not going to help us at all. So moving out the preschool out of that building is not really the best option. If we look and we start seeing these numbers staying where they are, yeah, we're going to have to do something differently. But I think as you put it, well, Mr. Dosen, was in our district, we have more than enough square footage to accommodate the kids that we have in our school. It's how we're utilizing that space. And we need to do a better job at how we're utilizing the space. Absolutely. But, making some of those moves of, looking at moving a grade level out of that building to make more room for the lower classes that have some higher levels now, we can. We do have kids that move in and out of the district all the time. I shared a data point with the parents last week that when I had our EMIS person run an enrollment report from September 6th when we opened the school year to that day, which was last Wednesday, and we are only plus 26 kids from the start of school till then, based on, if you look at the numbers of kids who moved out and who moved in, we're only plus 26. So it's not any much bigger, and that's spread out K to 5. So there's not, it's not that much larger than what we started with on September 6th. And again, it's taking into account, I know you're looking at numbers now, but there were kids who moved out. So if you look at the overall plus delta on that, it is plus 26 kids from what we started with on September 6th.
So we have capacity in the building. One, so just the kind of the two arrows in the quiver, if you will, for our elementary school is we could convert some of the collaborative space into classrooms, put up walls, or do something to create more classrooms, or move a grade level out and kind of place some musical chairs, move 5th grade, maybe move 8th grade up. We have space in the district. It's just about moving things around. Typically, though, and some people have talked about, well, I want to plan for 3 years, 4 years. It's like, look, we need about a year of runway. Is that correct? To be able to decide, okay, and maybe a year ahead to say, okay, these numbers are looking to the point where we're going to move 5th grade out, or we're going to construct classrooms. You wouldn't use an enrollment study that says 3 years from now, we're going to have 300 kids. So we better start building and constructing now, unless you're looking at a building, but we hope that we're right sized with our space. So in terms of what do we need to do from a planning standpoint and a reaction standpoint, we have space in that building that we can convert into regular classrooms, and we have space in other buildings that we could move grades around. But we're not pulling the trigger today saying 2 years from now we're going to move 5th grade. We're waiting to see what's going on with enrollment to see, hey, is that what does it actually look like? How many students are we going to have? And then trying to react from that. I know also you were saying too that unfortunately, we can have people come up, the week before school starts and enroll their kindergartner. There's no mandate that says you've got to register by June 1st. So we have 3 months to plan. What are we going to do? So some of this it's a moving target. Has that been one of our challenges?
Oh, absolutely. We had more than 40 kids enroll like the week before school, which just in kindergarten. And so, as early as we start, for as much as we communicated, we put flyers up in all the public areas that we could put up to let people know that it's time to register for kindergarten. And people move in over the summer, people leave over the summer, people just say, oh my gosh, it's August, I forgot to enroll my child in kindergarten. And so they show up kind of last minute. So that those numbers are a moving target. And just as I stated, we have kids that move in and out all year round. So, we have sometimes a big exit like at the holiday time where people are moving. And so they use the holiday break to be able to do that move. And then we have people who will withdraw at the end of the summer because they're moving or going somewhere else. So our numbers are constantly in flux all the time.
Okay. So I get how much of a moving target preschool is. I work in special education. I understand it. I see what goes on, in every district I've ever worked in with it. But when we're talking about moving target in the elementary school, and our parents want to know, they're asking us to be proactive. So my question is, can we find a bullseye within this target that we're going to say how much is too much with regard to class size? And if that is the case, what will our plan be to do that? And I mean, it's something, are we going to have a contingency? Because my concern is acting reactively is a recipe for disaster. Yeah. In that, can we try and think proactively, what is that target? What is going to be too much? And what would our plan be? And I think the other thing too, for the community, and I just want to prime everybody and say, what is going to come out of my mouth next may not make people happy. Okay. And I get it. I wish I could make everybody happy, but I won't. And I think that expectations might have to change around some things. Like what I hear everyone talking about is we're trying to implement a different instructional model in how we're utilizing the space in the elementary school. So that may mean what I'm hearing is every student is going to have a homeroom, but I don't know that you're uncomfortable with this, but I'm kind of maybe implying that you are, is that kids will have a homeroom, but they may not be in that homeroom a lot, depending on how they're grouped for instruction and how the spaces are utilized. So is that some of the issue is that there's expectation around my kid is going to be in an enclosed 4-wall room with a door all day long, because I don't know that that's going to be happening. So if I'm off the mark on that, I see a lot of no's, then I'm glad and I misunderstood. Okay. So what are anyone's thoughts on that when we say can we try and identify a target? Come up with a plan.
Well, absolutely. But I think what you said there last was kind of what, the goal is that, while you may on a homeroom roster have 27 kids, that's not going to be your instructional class. It's not going to be the size of your instructional class. So you might have, and I'll just use Mrs. Travers since most of you are there, you might have Mrs. Travers and not in kindergarten, but as your child moves up into upper grades, your child may have Mrs. Travers for a homeroom, to get information. And then the idea would be to look at all of those teachers in second grade and grouping the kids according to ability level to better target their instruction. So they use the whole entire grade level and the whole entire collaborative space to provide instruction in smaller groups using all the adults available. So in addition to your 10 teachers you have in second grade, you also have you have educational assistants that are assigned to that grade. You have extra teachers that are assigned to that grade. And then you have kids that are pulled out for gifted. So pulling all those kids at the same time to instruct them at their level and utilizing the whole second grade team or the whole third grade team, that is the vision of how we should be delivering instruction. And that's what we need to get to. So if you're asking for a target for what that homeroom would be, or if you're asking for a target for what that instructional group should be, I think those are going to be two different numbers moving forward.
So I remember having this conversation, and I believe Mark was there. We would have rich conversations, like Dr. Kalovic would come in, the curriculum director, and she'd be like, here's where our numbers are now. And she'd show us the chart of the district, and I don't know if you were there or not. And she'd be like, what is the board's expectation? And she would explain what her, ideology was. But I don't, and I understand we have a new building, and I am forgiving of that. Like there's a year where you figure things out, and I get that. But we need to have a conversation. We need to sit down and methodically create a plan, have Dr. Martin in there and explain what's going on, at our elementary and what his philosophy is of instruction. Because first of all, I don't think the public understands, not to say anything, but the other thing is I'm not sure I understand, and I've heard things about reading program, I'm not sure I understand. And I think I'd like to settle down and us to have a public, meeting where we're having things explained to us, and that would be good for the public. But also, if this is what we're doing, we're reinventing education and our ideas. I want to hear that, because I know teacher of record is different than when I'm doing gifted enrichment. That's a little bit different. And I can understand if we're hiring, I know one of the teachers that we hired and she's a new teacher. And so I'm not sure that one who's responsible for the growth, the map growth, I'm not going to be passing things off to her as easily. So I still feel responsible for the 25 that are in front of me. So I want to know, what is that instructor? How many are they actually responsible for? What's in a class size? And then go from there. But I don't feel like everything's new, but I don't feel like I know where we're going. I don't feel like I know what our plan is. I just to wrap it up, I'm not sure our public really feels like they know what our plan is. And I understand things are moving targets, and I respect that, but I also feel like we we need to have a vision that's communicated out, and people will understand a little bit better and be more understanding, but I don't feel like we have that right now. So could we try and shoot for maybe, once your team gets back together in February, we try and shoot for when, March, where we sit down and say, okay, and explain, these are not, I don't like the word targets, because I think it's a little misleading almost, but here's what we're hoping to do. And let's start talking about that, because I could never even make any decisions about that building and who's moving and who's going, because I really am not sure where we're going right now. And I know we know, but I don't know. And so that's difficult as a board member, and it's difficult for the public, because, it's a new way of doing things. It's a whole new thing. We don't have the community schools. It was all totally different. So that's my thought.
And I just have a few thoughts and a couple statements. I want to say I'm sorry for all the concerns that some of the parents are having at the elementary school. I truly feel badly about that. I'm sorry if the district isn't being as empathetic as it could be. And it sounds like there is a couple grades over there that are exceedingly large, and perhaps we could focus on maybe right sizing the student teacher ratio in those grades. But I guess I think we need to maybe get some more information from the treasurer here to find out what is involved with that, because we need that information, I think, too, to find out if we're it sounds like the third grade is particularly large this year and may continue to be, really big. I'd like to know what the cost, I think the community wants to know what the cost moving forward is going to be if, we do make a decision to try and reduce the student ratio in that grade in particular, or in the kindergarten so anyway, I think I'd like to get that information, because that's a big part of this discussion.
It'd be great to have a whole discussion involving what Mrs. Kramer said, just something where, okay, and you guys come back to us and say, here's what we have come up with, and then it's March, so it's still time for us, and it's not being reactive, it's showing this, vision, and maybe everything's great, but it involves everything. The finances, the instruction, with Mrs. Magyar, what her vision is of, Mrs. Toth. I'd like to hear what she has to say. So that's my thought.
Do you need a target class size in order to run numbers, or do you have
I think what the district has set forth is still what you're trying to get to, but we still have it. The building is what the building is, right? So the most you can get out of the space of fifth grade without moving it, or fourth grade, is that you can get 12 classrooms. It's the maximum we can put in that building in terms of putting up walls and closing off those collaborative spaces. So that would put us at 12 classrooms for all of our grade levels if we just walled it all up. The question is, what does that entail? And when I guess the other thing I would point out with the enrollment study is that when you look at the actual history of the district, the reason why they say declining enrollment is because this district had over 4,000 students, 10 years ago? So now that we're at, 3,700, that's 300 students that we've lost as a district. So that's why they classify us as a declining enrollment district. In the state of Ohio, what is there, probably 2% or less? The state of Ohio in general has declining enrollment in every public school district across the state. There are very few districts that are actually considered growing, and there is a funding formula model for those where they're actually getting extra money from the state because they're growing so quickly, and those are in Columbus. They are not anywhere near in the Cleveland area or surrounding area of us. Oh, North Ridgeville, sorry, the west side of Cleveland. So it's very rare, and so that's what we're. Just to put that in perspective, I realize that this is a little bit of a bump for us, but when I got here in 2020, we were at 3,700 kids, and that's kind of where we are right now. And that enrollment study does project that our class sizes are going to decrease back to around 250, and I guess we'll see if that happens. But we have classes in the district right now that are at 320. I think it's the 8th grade right now. Is the largest, I think.
Is our largest class right now.
So we have a couple classes that are there. And now, so when you look at 290, that's a big class right now for the elementary school, but for the district, it's not a big class necessarily. And 270 being the 3rd grade class, 277, 273 for 2nd grade. Those are not necessarily big classes when you look at the district's history. So
I sat through 3 enrollment studies, and I remember each time 3 different companies, and each time the numbers would be different. And you're like, how are we supposed to make this? Well, it's only as good. It's a forecast, and I understand. But here we are today, and we know. And I talked to my colleagues in North Royalton. They're new elementary, same problem, like same discussions. So I know that we're not off, but I do know that I feel like we owe it to the public, we owe it to ourselves to make sure we have a solid plan. And now we know where we're at, so we come at things a little more methodically.
So are we able, whether it's March or whatnot, to have another discussion? And the discussion, from what I'm hearing, is, we've talked about class sizes, but there's a lot of pullouts and collaborative use. So what does that mean if there's 27 students in one class, if throughout the day, groups of 5 or 6 are being pulled out? Like, how is there a way to make sense of all that? So, can that be shared with the board? Like, because the traditional class size it's a cloudier picture today, because if we're using a lot of the collaborative space, and from what we've been hearing, we're not utilizing it to the degree that we could. So, and, Brittany asked about what are we doing to use it more? So some of this gets into, what should a class size look like? And are there plans to leverage the collaborative space even more next year, which would tie into the class size, right? So class size could have 30 kids in it, but if they're only in there for an hour a day, all 30 of them, and the rest of the time they're being brought out and pulled out for various instruction, then how do you rationalize that? So maybe we could have another discussion, with Dr. Martin and whoever else makes sense, to talk about how should we be thinking about this. I know you shared, Joelle, some newer data that talks about, the benefit of smaller class sizes versus, if their class sizes are a little larger, what does that look like? It sounds like some of the thinking on some of the data on that may have changed over the years. So it would be good to kind of revisit that and understand and rationalize that. So is that something we can do maybe this March? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
I got one more thing to add.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. We're not gonna close
Because I
it down
forgot
until
to,
everybody's happy.
when I was asking about, trying to come up, we've been using Target. But the other thing I think that we need to do is have a plan, or at least the board needs to be communicated with on service delivery models for preschool, just so that we can kind of understand how we're serving those students, knowing that There's no way at any really given time, because these are students with disabilities who have IEPs that are individualized to them. But if we kind of have a model for how we're serving students based on those needs, it might be helpful and might help drive how we're, organizing that program and their space and utilizing that.
Yeah, we're using multiple service models, so we'll make sure that we include that in.
I think, yeah, that would be helpful.
The only other item I had that we didn't touch on, not to draw this out even longer, but concerns about storage, lack of storage space. Do you want to give some comment on that?
I mean, I will give some comment on it, but I don't know what that means in terms of, like, we had some issues with teacher mailboxes, so those didn't come in and they weren't installed till after Christmas. We were short lockers, and so we put the lockers in, and so now we have more lockers in there. We purposely bought furniture in the classrooms. The furniture looks different K-12 than it does 3 to 5. We bought furniture that the desks are on wheels and they don't necessarily have storage. And the thought on that, if we think about using the collaborative space again, was that kids could very easily just pick up their desks, wheel it out, start a group if they needed to, if there was, already kids working out. And so we did that on purpose. The way we utilize furniture, teachers are creating groups. They can just create them by kids. I need, these 3 kids, and wheel their desk, and they sit down right next to the teacher's desk. So that was the whole thought behind the furniture that we bought. And so doing so, because we made the furniture movable, they're not your traditional desk. They don't lift up where the kids have storage. So the teachers had to come up with some creative ways to store the students' materials if they needed, in the center of a group of desks or however they have it. There's also storage out in the collaborative spaces. There's storage out in the main hallways that is being utilized to store some of our reading materials that we have. So we have not heard necessarily from teachers about having storage issues. This is something that we've heard from parents, but so that's what I can speak to, because I'm not quite sure what that means.
Okay, I'm not either. I just hear there's lack of storage.
So maybe we can find out what that means. I mean, it's coming from somewhere. We've heard it over and over. So let's find out what it means. Like maybe Mrs. Tosnet, do you know?
I can share.
Okay.
I mean, what the parents that I have talked to and emails I've received, things are everywhere. Is what I'm hearing in the classrooms. I will say when I walked, now again, one data point, and I didn't walk the entire building. Stuff was managed pretty well as far as in the collaborative open spaces. But in the classrooms, my understanding is it's a hot mess. I mean, there's just stuff everywhere. There's stuff piled up, kids, everything everywhere, and it's a mess. So that's, I mean, I don't know that that's probably not the best description, but there's just, I mean, I'm just thinking, kids, and yeah, it's just it's stuff everywhere.
You know what? Here's the thing. We have a wonderfully seasoned staff. And so I know when we moved for IT, we weren't allowed to bring anything. People found their stuff on a website being sold. Like, they're like, are you kidding me? Like they were selling. So we allowed them to bring 20 years worth of stuff, where that's a little hard. It's when you move into, so I get that. So maybe some expectations. I know that with our new reading program, we may be holding on to lots of reading and leveled things. So maybe that discussion needs to happen from an admin,
Yeah, we've had that discussion.
Because
the theme last year was purge.
Stuff in my building. They're hiding it. They're like, oh gosh, and it's 10 years old. And they're like, you're not using this anymore, but they're hiding it. And so, because they're afraid, because we lived through hard times. So I'm just saying, maybe that would help. That discussion.
Certainly. I mean,
Again,
that was, we didn't want to move unnecessarily things. And we had, at one point, we talked about limiting the number of boxes and thought, oh God, that would not be a good thing.
we tried that, and
So
the response was
We
not
were
good.
like,
Yes.
one out
So
of furniture, no rocking chairs, and then, it was, but I know we didn't do that. So
we, no,
Some
we
of it.
did. We walked through all the buildings into each of the classes, and we had, I personally did it. I had teachers label what they wanted to take. And then we went around to every single room in the district and we said, yes, you need this. No, you don't need this. And we pulled off.
well, they Mrs. Megar, we sneaked And we snuck it back in a couple months later.
We did,
so-
I know.
Or they
So-
put the dots back on.
But I want you to know, we did go around and say, you know, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need that. And then after I left, they went back and put the Post-it notes back on the thing. So some of it is what the teachers wanted to do. And it, you know, it's not a lack of storage. We told them they weren't going to need some of these things. And I will say, Tish, sorry, Mrs. Kwiatkowski, I pointed it out to you. In some of the classrooms, like we designed the classroom space to have a certain number of furniture. And then the teacher said, no, I want a carpet area. So what did they do? They took all their furniture and they moved it to one side of the room to create a carpet area. So it looks like the furniture is on top of each other because they wanted a carpet area. So the rooms in pre-K, K, and 1 were all designed to have carpet space, which is why those rooms are a little bit bigger. But in 2nd grade, the thought was use the collaborative space. You can have multiple groups come out in 2nd grade and do your morning meetings. You don't have to necessarily do it in your classrooms. So there were choices made then by some other teachers to say, no, this space is important for me in my room. I'm going to create it, but it wasn't designed for that space. So some of it is teacher choice and teacher comfort level of what they wanted to see in their space as well.
Well,
Well-
I think our discussion in March will help. I think if once Mr. Martin, maybe he talks out loud in front of the public, because like, for example, like you said, you're in that room for a short period of time. But then who's teacher of record? Like I'm teacher of record at reading. So I take those 8 kids out of that classroom. Maybe he could explain that most of the time we're ability grouping, you know, and so those kids are not in that classroom 3/4 of the time. They're here and there to get their abilities, you know, addressed. So I would like to hear that. I think the public might feel a little bit better if he talks about what the plan is for our curriculum. And I think it'd feel a lot better for me if I heard Mrs. Toth and some of the things that she's noticing. And maybe, you know, hear from you what our overall vision is. You know, and that'll start another discussion of, you know, where once Mr. Yanagos speaks of the finances, that'll open something else up. Maybe. All we can. I hope we make you feel better that, I mean, we hear you. I hope you know that we absolutely hear you. And I really want to make sure that you know that you're heard. And I know that all of us have tried to do that. And we're going to figure this out. Okay. And to Mr. Dozen's point, we've had years where it's been a lot of figuring things out, and not to discredit anything, but we're going to figure this out and we're going to talk about it in public and we're going to hear it together and we're going to get feedback from you and we're going to get there. We will get where we need to go because we're Preschool Broadview Heights. We always do. Okay. So just please have faith in the people that you elected, you know, because I know that this is painful and I'm sorry, but we will figure this out. Okay. And I know we do have a plan. It's just, we don't right now. We do, but we
Well-
don't. Okay. So we always have it.
So before I tie this off, are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? Okay, so and to echo what Kathleen said, we do appreciate all of your feedback. You are our constituents. We are here to serve you. I know it's late, but hopefully you recognize we had an open, transparent conversation where no topic was off limit. That's the way it should be. You may not always be happy with some of where we land, but we're at least going to talk through it openly. And, you know, some of this is growing pains too. We had a lot of noise at the beginning of the year because of traffic, and then it kind of settles down, right? And so some of this is maybe growing pains. Some of it is maybe delivering education a little differently, getting used to. We have these small community schools, 3/4 small community schools, and then we bring everybody together. A lot of change, a lot of figuring it out, brand new building. So, you know, thank you for your patience as we work through this. So stay in touch, and we're going to move on to our next agenda item, but we'll take a little pause. If anybody wants to leave and doesn't want to stay to the bitter end, we won't mind. We love having people here, but we do have a little bit more of agenda to go through. Yeah, the board will take a small bio break because we have spoken a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you. Well, we're gonna figure this out. Don't worry.
Oh my gosh. That got rid of a lot of people left.
But here's the thing.
Only the diagram.
There are times, and I'm a teacher, so like I take, 10 kids and I take them in the classroom space and I do that. And they like, but then they go back. Like where, so I get what you're saying. It's not too tough. Not that else is happening. Great. That's not happening. You know what? There is. It actually should, like we just started, but we should, and we haven't been, because we haven't, in my opinion, been the way we should, we just been teaching them like they're all, and so we're doing better at that, but like, I just started going down to kindergarten, like, and it's not, it's only once a week, but still, like, I get what you're saying, that's the home base, and that's what kindergarten, generally speaking, yeah. It's different than third grade. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, yeah. I have one thing. I'm saying, she needs to go. Yeah. Yeah. She really, I mean, she's heard it. Yeah. Read through it.
Okay, so I think we have our group back. Are we able to continue?
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. Okay, everybody good? All right, we're going to move on with item 8B, girls wrestling coach discussion. So let me just kind of recap kind of where we're at. So we do have a young lady who is wrestling in our school, and one of the wrestling coaches came to us with the suggestion that we create a dedicated girls wrestling coach position. So that he first came to us and worked through the athletic director and our treasurer, and I was involved in some of those conversations. And what we had expressed to him was that traditionally when we start a new, whether it's a sport or an extracurricular, the position needs to be in the contract. So there is no position in the teacher contract today, a supplemental position for girls wrestling coach. So it would need to be added to that contract. The other thing is that in the past, when we've started new organizations, whether it's a new athletic endeavor or it's an extracurricular, what we look for is a pattern of sustained participation to warrant that the program will be fiscally sustainable, so that if we hired a coach or an advisor and created a position, that program would be on sound footing. And to remind everyone about how pay to participate works, what we do is we take the coaches or the advisors' supplemental amount, their paid amount, and we take the travel costs for that program, and then we divide it by the number of participants, and that's the pay to participate fee that the student or the family would pay. But students are capped at the high school, I believe, is it 500? It's $500. So the reason why we don't like to have programs that have very low participation rates is because we have to use taxpayer money to subsidize them. So for instance, if we had a program with one participant and let's say the coach was paid $2,500 and the travel expense was $500, the total cost would be $3,000. If you divide that by one, you'd have a fee of $3,000, which would come down to $500 because it would be capped at $500. And then the taxpayers would have to pay the remaining $2,500. So what we in general have been doing as a district to try to be fiscally responsible is ensure that new programs have enough participation to make the event, make the program sustainable. And if participation starts to drop, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, we start having conversations with whoever's in charge of that to try to increase participation, or we have to look at possibly shutting down programs if the numbers get too low. So that was still not a persuasive reason for Mr. McPherson. He felt like we should still go forward with creating this position. In order to do that, we would need to open up a discussion with our union to amend the contract with an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding, so that we could add a new position called, girls wrestling coach. So before we sent our administrative team to go forward for that conversation, the board wanted to have a conversation on, do we even want to pursue this, given currently we only have we would only have one participant in this activity. That's the backstory. And for what it's worth, my 2 cents on this, my opinion on it is, well, I'm thrilled that we have a young lady who's wrestling, and I want to be as supportive as possible. From a fiscal standpoint, I don't believe it's prudent to go forward creating a position, a new coaching position for one athlete. And would be very concerned if we did this, that it would set a precedent for other groups and other extracurriculars and other sports that will say, hey, all you need is one, and you don't shut the program down or create new programs with just 1 or 2 participants, which could become costly to the district.
All right, I'd like to start this
Sure.
conversation. Having a high-performing daughter, okay, played for Alabama softball, and have another one that plays in Kentucky. We were told by this coach that this girl was exceptional. She's an outlier, and my point is, it's hard. I tried to think of where this would be a precedent. Every sport, if you played football and you were a girl, then you could play football. You're not going to have another girls football team. You'd have to have a lot of girls who wanted this. Then I went through any other sport you can think of, and either we have gender separation or we have them where they compete all together. So in my mind, I remember starting teaching 12 years ago, and I had a girl who said to me, someday I want to be a wrestler. And I'm like thinking, oh my gosh, and then she never did it because she had nobody else to join her. And it takes a lot of courage to do, in my opinion, what this girl is doing. And so I'm hopeful that if we give this girl this one opportunity, that other girls who have been saying, oh gosh, I wished I could do that, this would be like the door that opens up for them. And I understand, fiscal responsibility is important, but it's also important to allow opportunity. And I just cannot think what other sport does it. I'm not sure this gives the same, I'm going to use the word again that I used to say, equity. And I'm just not sure that does that, because I don't know what other sport this would be a precedent for. And I don't know what I don't know. I called wrestling parents and did talk to them. And I asked, why would this be something needed? And, the parents said, I asked them, when you go to other wrestling tournaments, do you see girls there? And they said, yeah. In fact, my son, there's a whole girl wrestling team. And when we go to larger tournaments, and I'm like, wouldn't that be great if we had something like that? So I don't know what I don't know. I would want to do this to see if we created that door that opens for that girl who's I don't know, I don't want to be just with the boys. I want my own coach. So that was my idea. And we have this leader in 9th grade, this girl who's exceptional, who could lead the way possibly for that opportunity. And that's my thought. And it's a small amount, okay, in the large budget that we have. And I would imagine that if I went and talked to our parents, that our parents, based on my rationale, would say, okay, yeah, I get what you're saying, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that supplemental of $3,500. I'm okay with that because you're hoping that you put out this flag for girls that, come on, it's safe, you can do this. And that's my idea.
And I'm sorry, I left a small part of the scenario out. The girl is wrestling. The two options that were put on the table was leverage one of the boys' coaches, which is what's happening. So she is wrestling. She's not wrestling. She is afforded the opportunity to wrestle. The other option was to have a volunteer coach, but nobody stepped forward as of right now. Anyway, so that's part of it. It's not that she's not wrestling. She actually is wrestling, and she just doesn't have there's not a dedicated girls coach.
Well, and I guess one other point of clarification too is that in the past, the girls have had to wrestle with the boys, whereas they are starting to create more girls only tournaments. And one of the differentiations of the coach that was assigned to her was that if she was going to a separate tournament separate from the boys, that coach would go with her as a dedicated coach though too, just to be, clear on that we were sending a dedicated coach if it was a girls only wrestling tournament.
So that was worked out.
Versus like a co-ed.
So that's currently happening.
To my knowledge, yes, that was what was conveyed to me by Mr. Maslona was what we would dedicate was that if there was a girls only tournament, so the boys were in Canton and the girl was in Cleveland, that a coach would go with the girl to Cleveland and then the boys would have their coach or coaches in Canton, for instance.
Which, does that leave us short staffed then? Because I know that times when you're taking the assistant, for example, in certain sports, now they're short one. So why? That
I don't know. We would have to ask.
How many supplementals are for wrestling? Do you know?
Well, I guess I know it's at least two. I think it's like 3 or 4.
Is it?
Yeah.
They have like 11, 12.
I think they may have 3, but then they have I think then they start to go in the volunteers. I think 3 are paid and then they start with volunteers, I think.
3 for varsity and 3 for, isn't there a JV? There's a varsity and there's a JV. That's what the parent told me.
Yeah, I was like.
There's an A and there's a B. So there's 3 and 3, that's something that was a gap. And
I think I remember last year, the total of wrestling was 30 kids total.
Okay.
So I don't know what the total, he'll give us the total of coaches, but.
Clarification, Mr. McPherson, he's the middle school wrestling coach.
Mhm.
So he was this girl's coach. So he came to us and wrote us extensively. So, and I've known the McPhersons for years, 5 kids in this district. And he has a son who's a junior. Okay. And so I believe that's sophomore, my fault. But so it's kind of like in my mind, and I'm just going to say this, Mr. Reynolds, and we're talking about tennis courts and we're talking about putting them at the community center. And we're like, oh, that's a great idea. And we're going to put them over here. And then Mr. Reynolds stands up, who's the tennis coach. And he's like, no, really, that's not a great idea because here's why. I'm the line judge and I have to run over here and there. He goes, it's not even possible. So the fact that Mr. McPherson came to us and said, this is what's needed. Okay. I really want to put a lot of weight on that as well, because I know he wouldn't do that if it wasn't something that he thought was best. And so that said, that's another part.
And Mark, you indicated when you introduced this, that really one of the first steps is to reach out to the union. Has that been done? And what was the union's response?
Well, no, so before reaching out to the union, the board needs to give direction that we wish to do so. So the end of this conversation needs to end in, do we want to give Joelle direction to reach out to the union to have a discussion about creating an MOU to create a brand new girls wrestling coach position? Or does the board wish to not pursue that?
Okay.
Okay, so I have a question then. I heard you talk about, okay, so here's kind of how we do things when we're going to create a program. What I didn't hear was some of the preparation for that. I think one of the strengths of BBH 100% is that we want students to feel connected to school, to be involved in extracurriculars and clubs. We are totally committed to that. And we know that kids that are connected to their schools in that way are just better achieving students and perform and feel connected. And there's lots of good outcomes from that. That being said, how do we go about getting some data on whether the interest is there to grow the girls wrestling program. We do have some wrestling programs in the community. So, I mean, is there a way to find out? I mean, we have this girl, I think we all want to support her in wrestling. We know she is wrestling. If this is going to continue to grow and this is going to be a need that we need a coach, before we even get to asking for an MOU yet, is there a way to find out, do we have the interest? Are there going to be more girls coming? I mean, I think because you talk about sustainability of the program, how would we do that? How does that happen in our schools? You know, like kids want to develop a club.
Yeah.
How do they go about that? How do they get the interest? How do they get the word out? What do they?
And I know in the past, like lacrosse, before we had lacrosse, you know, it was a club sport.
Yeah.
And it was sustained high levels of participation before turning it into a varsity. So, you know, you could take one of two approaches. I think Kathleen was suggesting the build it and they will come, like create the coaching position, put it out there, and then that will draw hopefully more young women into the wrestling. Or you build the participation up and then you create the position after you've seen it sustained. So my understanding is in the past, that was the model we followed. We followed first, can we offer the program? So like this young lady is wrestling now. We found a way to do it. You know, maybe it's a volunteer that steps in if the program grows, until you start to see the numbers are there that could support financially to have the coach. So you could do it one of two ways.
And I think our recent sport would be like boys volleyball, for instance. It's been a club sport for a very long time, and it has been sustainable at about, I think there's like 18 or 20 boys on that club team, and they're moving in that path to varsity. So, I mean, it's been my experience too, that you kind of home grow that in terms of whether it's a volunteer position or whatever. And then it's the proof of concept, right? There's someone who's going to have to grow that program that's going to build that interest in that base. And then it usually evolves into like a supplemental or supplemental contract, I guess I would say.
I think what the difference is this is more of a gender specific sport at this moment in time in our district. And so like volleyball is not that like that. I don't see it that way, at least, and neither is lacrosse. And so, because it's a team, this is like an individualized thing. And my husband told me that his friend was the first person to be a swimmer here. We didn't have any swimming. So he was the only one. And, you know, and so you wonder, you know, how does that get started? And I'm just saying, and then I asked how it got started. It didn't get started that way. I mean, somebody stepped up and the board actually, you know, look how long it took us to get to where we actually had a recognized swim team. I mean, it took forever. They were outside. So that said, I find this one a little more difficult and not actually comparable to something that's a club. Okay, because I do find this sport more gender specific. And I do find that if we show and put it out there and support it, then maybe it would look a little bit different to those girls that, you know, feel like they want to do that, but they don't want to go join necessarily the boys team. Okay. And so that's my thought. Did you get the numbers, what it was for the A and the B, or is it just a total for the coaching positions, the supplementals?
Well, there's actually, as far as wrestling coaches, we have 3 filled currently, plus the tournament director. So we're at 4 paid positions. But we do have a 7th grade head coach that we don't use, and we have a 7th and an 8th grade assistant coaching position that is based on.
That we don't use, so they're not filled.
Right.
Correct. Is that right?
Correct. And it usually goes by how many kids they get
Right.
in sport. So
Okay.
apparently the numbers are down that they couldn't. I'm going to say maybe there might be 7th grade involved. Spencer's here, so. Are there any 7th graders? I was about to say they've been in probably 4 years at the middle school. We don't use 2 of our supplementals at the middle school. We have 2 coaches, but there's 2 that go on field.
So
it's made across the district for wrestling. 2 of the middle school.
So this one, I like your idea, Mrs. Krakowski, like this wasn't going to be for this year because this is the whole process. We have to get an MOU and then So more than likely this executes next year. If it was to be something, that's the way I would see it. And so like, I'm curious, who would, you know, like anonymously, could we even ask, send out a survey to all the kids, just, you know, and say to everybody and say, would you join a wrestling team if there was one available to you, to the girls? I don't know. Like, how do we do that? Well, I don't know.
Don't we have numbers? Don't we have, isn't there like 6 girls who are?
Participating
Yes.
on our wrestling team?
Yes.
Not currently.
No.
There was interest and we actually tried to draw some interest now, but unfortunately we weren't able to get that on. Some of that was the pay to play. It's rather high, which I hope that a little bit. That's a cost of entry a little high. We did try to get some interest there. Wise, and you know, I do think also from the former wrestling coach to the school wise, get to high school too. I coached girl wrestling too at the middle school. When you get to high school, there is a draw to have girl wrestling at the middle school. Or deal with our developmentally. You know, when you get to high school, it's like they have a separate team.
I think, I mean, I applaud who our wrestler is, just to put herself out there and do that alone, you know, like, that's amazing. And so the way I see it is like, I want to support that and I would like to see what happens. And I've gone through the sports. I don't see where this is setting a precedent. I think this is a case by case basis. And in this case, I'm asking this board to support. Let's see what happens. Let's put this out there for this, you know, girl and see if that maybe we can build something. I mean, if there's interest, and maybe it is the pay to participate, it will be high. And maybe that's what the demise ends up being of but maybe not, you know.
I'm just assuming though that we're not filling those other wrestling positions due to enrollment though, correct? Is what we're saying, the other coaching positions. So I think though, if you would follow our same practice though, and you would, even if you have the position and there's one person, the district response would be that we wouldn't fill the supplemental, I think. Right?
Yeah, because then the pay to participate is so high that.
Right. So we wouldn't, like, we don't have enough to fill those other coaching positions. So if we had one girl and one coaching position, even if it was in the contract, we typically would not fill that for any other sport.
I get that, and that's not how it works, though. We all know that some other sports subsidize other sports, right? So, I mean, that is common practice. The only one that actually is making the money, and to my understanding, last time was football. Okay, so that said, okay, this is an opportunity. This is asking for equity. This has nothing to do, it does not make complete sense financially. Okay, this is a small amount. And this is what we should be doing in the 21st century, is creating opportunities.
Well, taxpayer, just to be clear, taxpayer subsidize all of our programs.
I understand, and I would tell you that this community would want that opportunity for their children.
I understand. You know, again, I echo my concern is you say this is a carve out, it's a one-time thing, special circumstances. What do you say to the next person who comes and says, I want to create this activity. There's only one person, but you did it for girls wrestling, and I want you to do it for this new activity. Go ahead and create it.
Cross that bridge when we come to it.
Well, again, you're creating a precedent and you say, why are you giving special treatment to this one position? I want to be treated fair and equitably. I want to create a blank team and I want to coach. I guess I don't understand how you respond back to that. How do you rationalize and say, well, this had more merit than yours because this was a gender specific case and yours is not?
I get that. And I guess when well, I would like to say the dominant gender, but when you have had children that have had to go and do that, and you understand what those opportunities are, and you are an outlier, which I've had 2 outliers, I am telling you, this is something that we should be doing in our district, is giving these opportunities. To Mrs. Kwiatkowski's point, to making these connections, but we need to give girls more opportunities. And I'm thinking, based even what our middle school principal, vice principal has just said, that they might come because if this opportunity is here. So I apologize if I don't see the danger in the precedent.
And I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying, Mrs. Mack, but she is wrestling this year. So, I mean, she is able to compete and
No, I get that. I'm doing it for the other girls. The other girls who are not maybe coming. And I do know of them, and I hear that there are others. And I hear other schools do have girl wrestling teams. So I would like to see if this opens things up for a girl. That's what I'm asking this board to consider. Sometimes some things you do aren't completely like financially always the best, but you do them because you know your community would want you to do them. It's a leadership thing.
Other comments or questions? before we-
Yeah, just from my perspective, just sort of, I guess, sum up somewhat of what I've been hearing. And Craig, you literally took the words out of my mouth. Proof of concept was literally written in my notes. I would like to see a proof of concept in this development. I would like to see the interest come to the table. And I think that if the wrestling team and the wrestling leadership believes in this, then I think starting with a volunteer coach in order to drum up that interest and participation will elicit that proof of concept that I personally am looking for in order to subsidize anything going forward. But at this time, I'm not comfortable subsidizing a coaching salary for that.
Ellen and Tish, I think Kathleen, myself, and Brittany have kind of put our thoughts on the table on which way we're leaning.
okay, if I didn't earlier, I'm leaning against, since she's able to wrestle this year, I'm leaning against it.
Okay, Tish.
I would like to know how feasible it is, to Britt's point regarding interest and how we're going to be able to develop it, not against a coach. But right now, I think until I think it's on us, or from a board standpoint, to follow our process and procedure for a position like this. So I mean, I guess, what I'd like to know is, can we hold a meeting at the high school and say, do we have any girls that are interested in wrestling? That we're open to, doing it, but until we're able to get a handle on that, I don't know how you kind of go forward.
Okay, so for now, the board is very supportive of this young lady wrestling. We're thrilled that she's able to wrestle, but to sanction this as a sport with a dedicated coach, the board would like to see some more sustained participation numbers, which is our normal process for bringing on a new coaching position. Okay, any other comments or questions before we move on? Okay, let's move on to item C, new revised board policy, final reading. Joelle, any comments? So,
I don't have any comments unless there's any questions about any of the policies that are up there.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, wait,
This is an action. So let me start by saying resolve to adopt new revised board policies, final reading. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Brittany. Now, Joelle.
Does any board member have any questions about the policies that are on second read and final approved?
Nope. Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Oops. Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Moving on to item E, resolve to approve the new Ohio minimum wage rate to $10.10 per hour. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Craig, you want to?
It's just what it is. So we board approve it. There was a pretty big hike on January 1st. And so this is just recognizing that that is the state minimum wage at this time. And we are abiding by that.
Okay. Any comments or questions? Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Item G, resolve to approve the Ohio Schools Council Governance Policy Change Resolution as attached. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any explanation?
Yeah, so Ohio Schools Council is a group of all of our school districts. We get together and we can have better buying power over things we buy, like buses and that kind of thing. And so this just, and when we have meetings, they send us a sheet to vote on. So this is just a resolution that they need, that the board gives the superintendent the right to vote on your behalf when we have our meetings on these joint contracts and stuff.
Comments or questions? Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen,
Yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman, sorry. I think I checkmarked before you said it.
Well, I'm a yes, I'm a yes too.
You're just so close to me.
All right, item 9, superintendent's other business. Item A, resolve to approve ABA outreach service agreements as attached. Item B, resolve to approve the 2022-2023 Garrison Special Education Agreement as attached. Item C, resolve to approve Mindfully Agreement as attached. Item D, resolve to approve revisions to the 2023-24 course option as attached. Item E, resolve to approve the CSU licensure preparation MOU as attached. Item F, resolve to approve the ESC primary service agreement for the 2023-2024 and 2024-2025 school years as attached. Item G, resolve to approve BBH High School spring softball trip. Item H, resolve to approve the BBH High School AP Biology 2 Stone Lab trip. Item I, resolve to approve the revisions to the 2023-2024 district calendar as attached. Item J, resolve to approve the 2023-2024 OHSAA membership resolution as attached. Item K, resolve to approve superintendent's other business items A through J. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
You got any breath left?
Okay. Now I need a drink of water while Joelle explains all of this.
And I need you to scroll back up to the top. Thank you, Craig. Okay, ABA outreach service agreement. We changed providers of our behavioral support companies. And so they have started working with our kids now. We were with Red Oak and we switched over to ABA. So this is the contract for the rest of the school year. Gerson is another service provider. We have a particular student who will be attending Gerson. So that is the contract for that. Mindfully is another organization that provides our Medicare therapy. So any of our kids who get therapies through Medicare, that is the group that we use. Medicaid, sorry. Revision, the high school course options. This is just approving the course catalog before kids engage in registering for classes for next year. The licensure agreement is just to allow CSU to place their students in Rexville Broadview Heights as student teachers. The ESC primary service agreement is our agreement with our educational service provider. It's a 2-year contract that we provide biannually. The softball trip is as attached. The biology trip is as attached. There is one slight revision as recommended by our high school and middle school to the district calendar for next year. It does not change the number of days that students are in attendance. It just moves a teacher workday from January 17th to the 8th. That's all it does. So it extends the holiday break by 1 additional day. And that is to allow the semester to end at the holiday break next year, to have a clean cut in semester. And when the kids don't have to spend their Christmas break studying and come back for 3 weeks. And so that was a recommendation from our high school administration and middle school administration. OHSA membership is our annual membership that we're going to be on to OHSAA.
Do you need a drink too?
I need physically to go. What'd
And-
you say?
She needs a drink too, a bottle of water.
Bottle of water to go.
Any comments or questions?
I have questions. So what precipitated the switch from Red Oak to ABA? Because you're talking about two really different things here. So that's why. Yes, I would love it.
To ABA. ABA is in addition to Red Oak.
Oh, my bad.
So-
Okay,
So ABA, we hired a BCBA.
Okay.
2 days a week.
Okay.
Work with these specific students.
Yeah.
And we have an RBT, which is a registered behavior technician, working with one student in our. So that's what the contracts were, in addition to the Red Oak support that we still have.
I'm sorry, that's my mistake.
I mean, so yeah, that's why, I mean, those are very different services and I was worried that that was creating a gap and the services needed
I
there.
think the mindfully is replacing some Red Oak therapies.
Mindfully, it's replacing our insurance-based therapies that we were providing through Red Oak, which the insurance-based therapists that we had in the district, we had 2 of them, both of them left Red Oak to go and take different positions, and Red Oak has not been able to fill those positions.
Okay.
So we had to look elsewhere to provide that service to students.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
My apologies.
Oh, no, that's okay.
There's a lot of moving pieces.
And then I just have a quick comment that before the mindfully agreement is signed, I don't think paragraph 2 is clear because it doesn't specify. I had asked about what school it's at. There's this blank in the paragraph, and I think we need to write in all locations.
We do. We will before we send it
Okay.
back there, yeah.
Other comments or questions? Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Abstain.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Item 10, Superintendent's Consent Agenda. Item A, resolve to approve certified personnel recommendations. Item B, resolve to approve classified personnel recommendations. Item C, resolve to approve supplemental personnel recommendations. Item D, resolve to approve superintendent's consent items A through C. May I have a motion?
So moved. Any questions about any of the recommendations? I will have a comment after your vote.
Oh, well, I was gonna say, can I say, or do I need to wait until after? I just congratulations to, why am I forgetting her last name at, the middle school and our retirements? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, she's awesome. Congratulations to her. But, yeah,
Roll call.
and to Witzke.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes.
Well, I would like to personally thank the board for allowing the position change for Mr. Brian Wyckoff to move into a different role. He's always been an integral part of our team and just looking forward to expanding his role. And we're very happy to have you in that new role. So thank you.
Yeah. Congratulations and good luck. Yes. Item 11, Treasurer's Consent Agenda. Item A, resolve to approve the financial reports as attached. Item B, resolve to accept donations as presented. Item C, resolve to approve the minutes from the December 14th, 2022 regular board meeting and the January 4th, 2023 organizational board meeting as attached. Item D, resolve to approve the treasurer's consent items A through C. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Craig, you're up.
All right, my goal is an hour. So.
We missed that goal a long time ago. Did you mean just your agenda item or?
Hour of finance.
What hour would we be finishing? That's the question. Okay.
We can have another snow day tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Some of us didn't get snow.
Bite your tongue.
Oh,
You need snow to have a snow day.
why?
Apparently not everywhere.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, lots of reasons.
Yeah.
Okay.
I tried for you. I was on the phone with him at 3:30 this morning. He wasn't budging. So just to put that on record.
All right, it's got to snow numbers now. Craig?
It's gonna snow numbers. Anyways, we are in the process of, this is the actuals through December. We're actually trending right on par for right now, as you will see at the end. So the total money we brought in the month of December was $564,000. We did get a little bump in state funding. I'm not exactly sure why, but I'll always take it whenever they want to give us a little bit extra. They'll probably even it out next month. On the expenditure side, we spent $4.1 million. You can see that it's $2.5 million in personnel services. So those are salaries, and then benefits were $1 million. 400,000 in purchase services, 69,000 in supplies. This basically shows you on the right-hand side, and it kind of will minimize, or not minimize, but shows us where we would projected to finish. So the salmon kind of colored or orange colored column is now the projected, and then the blue colored column is the forecast. So right now we're trending just a little bit above forecast by about $88,000. So when we look at our expenditures, revenues from December of 22 versus December of 23, we see a large bump. And the reasons why are, it was our state revenue. So again, I'm just going to preface this the next month for January. Last year, we got that large settlement as they finally put in the state funding formula correctly. So state funding next month is probably going to look way below what we got last year as they kind of evened out those trends when they instituted the new funding formula. On the other revenue, it's just slightly higher than it was last year, but most of that is all in state revenue as compared to last year, because it was very low up till January. On the expenditure side, as we compare expenditures from December of 22 to December of 21 to December of 22, really fiscal 22, fiscal 23. The difference there is basically that last year was a 3-pay month. So that is all, it's a big difference. It's about $1 million or a little over $1 million. And that is because last year we had an extra payroll in the month of December. We will have that this year coming up in March. Purchase services and supplies were trending down this year versus last year. And then again, this kind of summarizes a little bit where we are in terms of, on the revenue side, we're a little bit unfavorable because we're below what we're projecting by about 50,000. But so far on the expenses side, we are under the forecast by about 141,000. So that makes our ending cash balance of 23,264 if all goes according to plan.
We keep hiring though.
I know, but we just hired some of those people, so they just started being paid in December and January.
Actualized yet.
Some of those will start to kick in because the one actually just got her first paycheck last week or this week. So as we've hired those staff members, they're slowly coming kind of like on the payroll.
Those are not in our forecast.
So some of them were
as you projected,
because we added some preschool teachers at the start of the year, but we have a couple other ones that have now come on that were not in the forecast.
Okay.
I hate when I ask questions about finances.
It's a safe space.
But, okay. I just passed my class, so maybe I can do some. ESSER funds, where would I see this in the forecast? And then I have the question of how much staff are being paid by ESSER funds. Like, do we have?
So that's an easy question or easy answer. One, you will never see ESSER in the forecast because that is a different fund. So you will not see that. The forecast is only the general fund. So we expense out of those funds, which are 500 funds, 507 are the ESSER funds. And then we run those in the negative, and then we ask the state to give us the reimbursement. So you won't see those do not affect the forecast in terms of how that money is utilized. Salaries, though, what a lot of schools have done is they have supplanted and they have paid salaries out of ESSER dollars to then alleviate or help their general fund. We did not do that. We spent the majority of our ESSER funds on the HVAC. We spent it on technology, the majority of it, because those were our needs at the time. We were required to spend 428,000, I think, 32,000, something like that, for learning loss. So the summer of 21 was when they ran the interventions and the summer schools. That was about $190,000. One thing we did not mention earlier is that we hired 5 tutors at the elementary school that are also there this year. Those are paid for out of ESSER dollars, but they're not any of our actual like full-time staff. We have no one paid out of ESSER.
Coaches, we are paid like that.
No.
Okay.
No.
So when that disappears next year, is that right?
Yes, we don't really have any impact to the general fund because like the tutors were $240,000 worth of tutors would go away at this point. So we wouldn't have those necessarily in place. We are paying for those for learning loss through the ESSER funds. So no impact in terms of that on the forecast.
Thank you.
Other schools had huge,
No, I know,
huge.
I know where I work.
Yeah.
Not huge, but yeah, okay, I get it. Oh,
She's living in COVID ESSER funds.
There's gonna be major staff. That's gone.
No, some schools have hired 10s, 20s, 30s, 100 people. I mean, they've hired tons of staff with the ESSER dollars.
Was the tutor.
Correct. And the summer school piece, but those were not any current, there's no regular staff paid out of it. Yes.
So for those are,
I know. It's gonna be a huge hole.
Yeah,
yeah,
it is.
for those who are still with us. So ESSER money is basically money from the federal government for COVID relief that found its way to school districts. And if you use those monies to hire new staff, those districts have a time bomb waiting, because when the money dries up, then you've got staff and you've lost the funding for them. So they're either going to need to let go of the staff or find a way to pay the staff. So we did not do that. We used it for, like you said,
Technology, cleaning
HVAC,
supplies,
technology, right? So, and also for learning and instruction tutors and whatnot, which was
Additional.
transitory to just say to get them over the hump. Okay, very good. Any other comments or questions about the financials? Yeah.
Well, no, this is the
Okay.
last thing. This just compares revenue from last year to this year, which is in the green and blue columns, and then expenditures. So we, again, are trending a little bit down, but right now that is to date. And so it's down because of that third pay. Yes.
So our discussion earlier about possibly trying to improve or reduce the student teacher ratios at the elementary school. If we factor some extra teachers or some extra walls into that school, into the forecast, how is that going to affect the forecast? I mean,
Not well.
I guess could you be more specific about
Well, I mean, it depends on what the needs are. We have some, we're starting to have those staffing conversations over the next couple of months as we head towards next year. And there's a lot of things that depend on licensure. So we may be able to move people from the middle school down to the elementary school. It depends on what's happening, of whether they're all staying in the same locations. There's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to yet, and that will depend on what we have to end up doing in terms of fulfilling classrooms. If we decide to wall in all of those collaborative spaces, then you're gonna have to hire 2 teachers per grade level. So that's, in my world, I always factor in what a full-time salary person makes. So that's gonna be $110,000 a person times 6 people. So you're looking at over $500,000. Then you factor in $25,000 for benefits per person, et cetera, et cetera. You're about $150,000, $130,000 a person.
that?
So it's a lot. So we try to balance all of that. And that's a worst case scenario, right? So we are going to meet in March. So we will talk about what our plan is. So not to be the doomsday person, but it's anytime you hire staff, we all know that staff is the largest percentage of what we spend money on. So we want to try to make those strategic while being fiscally responsible while meeting the educational needs of the kids.
But you definitely have to revise your forecast significantly.
Yes. Well, we've already hired people this year. So yes, to some extent. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think as we go forward, as we see, right, as we start seeing registration come in and we start understanding, or, if we decide, hey, we need to bring in more teachers, we need to put walls up, whatever that is, right? We're always trying to strike a balance to trying to be, educationally appropriate, but fiscally responsible, because, there are limits. We have limited resources. And so oftentimes too, we look for our administration to bring us creative solutions on how to offset costs. So instead of just saying, hey, we need to add 6 people at $600,000, there might be some other options that we can look at to try to balance out the sting of bringing more staffing on.
And we don't know. I mean, we're waiting still now for the governor's budget. We don't know what's going to happen with the fair school funding plan, and while that doesn't necessarily affect our district, it hasn't negatively impacted it. So we've maintained at least some consistency. They're trying to get some revisions made to it, but the state legislature, from what we understand, is basically saying schools have too much money and they don't want to give schools any more money. And so we don't know what's going to happen. We're not one of those school districts because some of those schools have offset their general funds with ESSER dollars. And so it appears that there's this influx of cash that was one-time stabilization funds that will quickly dwindle as schools go through that process. And we don't know what they're going to recommend. I would find it a hard argument for them not to fully fund it and continue that funding model, considering that the state's revenues and their rainy day fund is at an all-time high at $3.5 billion. They're consistently every month beating projections. But it depends what the legislature does and what the governor recommends to see whether we could we might get more state funding. We may stay consistent. We don't know yet. That should come out. I believe it'll be out. We should know in March.
So don't count your chickens.
Don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Okay,
Yes.
other questions on the financial report? Okay,
All right, so we did have some donations that came in. I feel like there was one on here that was big. There's a $3,000 one there, $4,000 one for Gymnastics World, or from Gymnastics World. So we appreciate the donations, and then just the regular minutes.
any other comments or questions? Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Witkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Item 12, announcements. The next regular meeting of the Board of Education is scheduled for February 22nd at 7 p.m. Item B, resolve to adjourn the meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack, Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes, thank you all for hanging in there and have a good evening.